The judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom like a death sentence. 30 days. That's all Ethan Rourke had left before losing the ranch his father had died building, unless he found himself a wife. At 28, broke and desperate, he'd tried everything except begging. The law was clear. Unmarried men couldn't hold territory land grants. They needed stable households. He stood outside the courthouse, staring at dust devils dancing across Main Street, when Eleanor Whitmore approached, a 55-year-old widow with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had buried one husband already. She spoke 4 words that would change both their lives. "I'll marry you, Ethan." If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, and if you enjoy what's coming, hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to follow this journey to the very end. The whiskey burned going down, but Ethan Rourke barely felt it. He sat alone in the back corner of Murphy's saloon, the telegram from the territorial court crumpled in his fist, reading the words he'd already memorized. Failure to comply with household stability requirements will result in forfeiture of land grant, effective 30 days from date of notice. 30 days to find a wife or lose everything. The ranch had been his father's dream, 2,000 acres of high desert country where the Sangre de Cristo Mountains cut purple shadows across the evening sky. Thomas Rourke had worked himself into an early grave, proving that land could support cattle, that a man could carve out something permanent from the wild territory. He'd died 3 years ago, leaving Ethan with a half-built dream and a stack of debts that grew faster than grass after spring rain. Now the territorial government wanted to take it all away because Ethan wasn't married. Because some politician in Santa Fe had decided that bachelor ranchers couldn't be trusted to civilize the territory. The law had been on the books for years, rarely enforced, until the railroad started pushing west and land suddenly became valuable. "Another round, Rourke?" Murphy called from behind the bar. Ethan shook his head. He couldn't afford another drink. Couldn't afford much of anything these days. The past year had been brutal. Drought had thinned his herd, wolves had taken 20 head in the spring, and the bank was already circling like buzzards. Marriage had seemed like a distant concern, something he'd get around to eventually when the ranch was stable and he had something to offer a woman. Eventually had run out. The saloon door swung open, bringing a gust of September wind and 3 ranch hands from the barquet spread. They spotted Ethan and their laughter died, replaced by the careful politeness men used around someone they pitied. "Heard about your trouble," one of them said, stopping by Ethan's table. "Rough break." "I'll manage." "Sure you will." The man's tone said he didn't believe it. 30 days, though. That's not much time to find a wife, especially when you're... He stopped himself, but Ethan knew what he'd been about to say. Especially when you're broke and about to lose everything. After they moved on, Ethan drained his glass and stood. The room tilted slightly, but he steadied himself against the table. He'd spent 3 days considering his options, and they all led to the same conclusion. He was finished. The unmarried women in Cedar Ridge numbered exactly 4. 2 were 16 years old, 1 was already promised to the banker's son, and the 4th was Sally Morgan, who'd made it crystal clear she wanted nothing to do with a failing rancher. He'd even considered riding to Santa Fe, maybe finding someone there who didn't know about his circumstances. But that would take time he didn't have, and money he didn't possess. The cool evening air helped clear his head as he stepped onto the wooden sidewalk. Main Street stretched out before him, false-fronted buildings painted gold by the setting sun. Cedar Ridge wasn't much: a general store, a hotel, Murphy's saloon, a church, a few other establishments, but it was home. More importantly, it was the supply hub for the surrounding ranches, including his. "Ethan Rourke," the voice came from his left. Eleanor Whitmore sat in one of the chairs outside the hotel, a book open in her lap. She'd been in town for 2 months, renting a room above the general store after selling her late husband's farm in Kansas. Ethan knew her slightly, polite nods on the street, brief conversations when their paths crossed at the Mercantile. "Mrs. Whitmore." He touched the brim of his hat. "I heard about your situation." She closed her book, marking her place with a ribbon. "The whole town has heard. News travels fast when it's unpleasant." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I suppose it does." "Sit down, please." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. He hesitated, then complied. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't what most people in Cedar Ridge expected from a widow. She dressed well but not extravagantly, spoke her mind without apology, and seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that she was living alone in a frontier town. The silver threading through her dark hair caught the last rays of sunlight, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied him with a directness that made him uncomfortable. "I have a proposition," she said. "Ma'am?" "You need a wife. I need security and purpose." She stated it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "I'm proposing we marry." For a moment, Ethan couldn't find words. Then, "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't think that I'm too old." A slight smile touched her lips. "I'm 55, Ethan. I'm aware of that fact. I'm also aware that you have exactly 27 days left to comply with the court's order, and that your options are extremely limited. This isn't—" He struggled to find the right words. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." She leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear about something. I'm not doing this out of charity or pity. My husband died 18 months ago. I sold the farm because I couldn't run it alone and refused to be dependent on my son's charity. I came west looking for a fresh start, but I've discovered that a widow alone, even one with money, has very limited options in a place like this. You're educated. You have means." Ethan gestured toward her book, the quality of her dress. "You could what? Open a shop? Teach school to children who already have a teacher? The hotel owner has made it clear he'd prefer I find permanent lodging elsewhere. I'm too old to be considered marriageable by most standards, too independent to be comfortable as someone's housekeeper, and too proud to simply wait around to die." Her voice remained steady, but Ethan caught the steel beneath it. "You need to save your ranch. I need a place where I can be useful and secure. It's a practical arrangement." The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Ethan watched a tumbleweed roll down the empty street, pushed by wind that carried the promise of autumn. "People will talk," he said quietly. "People are already talking. About both of us." Eleanor's expression didn't change. "You're the young rancher about to lose his inheritance because he's too poor to attract a wife. I'm the aging widow who should have stayed in Kansas where I belonged. Let them talk. Words don't change facts. What would you want from this arrangement?" "Equal partnership." The answer came without hesitation. "I won't be hidden away or treated as a burden you're forced to carry. If I'm going to be your wife, I'll be a full partner in the ranch. I've run a farm, Ethan. I know how to manage accounts, how to deal with suppliers, how to make hard decisions. I'm not asking to be put in charge, but I won't be decorative." Ethan studied her face, looking for signs of desperation or delusion. He found neither. Eleanor Whitmore looked back at him with calm certainty, like someone who'd already considered every angle and made her peace with the decision. "I'd need time to think about it," he said. "You have 27 days total. I'd suggest you don't think too long." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'll be direct about one more thing. This would be a marriage in legal terms, but I'm not expecting romance or pretending this is a love match. We're both adults who understand what this is, a practical solution to practical problems. I'll expect respect and honesty. Beyond that, we can determine the rest as we go." She picked up her book and turned toward the hotel entrance, then paused. "I buried a husband I loved deeply, Ethan. I'm not looking to replace him or pretend this is something it isn't, but I'm also not ready to simply stop living. Think about it. You know where to find me." Nut. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in the small ranch house his father had built, listening to wind rattle the shutters, and tried to see a path forward that didn't involve Eleanor Whitmore's offer. By dawn, he'd failed to find one. The ranch spread out before him as he stood on the porch with his morning coffee. 2,000 acres of high desert grassland, the mountains rising like sentinels to the east, the creek that ran year-round cutting a green line through the property. His father had chosen this spot carefully, finding one of the few places where water was reliable and the land could support cattle through the harsh winters. Thomas Rourke had been 52 when he'd started building this dream, using money he'd saved from 20 years of working other men's ranches. He'd died at 59, thrown from a horse while checking fence lines. In those 7 years, he'd transformed raw land into something valuable. Not wealthy, not yet, but sustainable. promising. Ethan had been 25 when his father died, convinced he could carry on the work. 3 years had taught him how much he still had to learn. His father had possessed an instinct for the land, for animals, for when to push and when to wait. Ethan tried to match that instinct, but the truth was harder to swallow. He was still learning, still making expensive mistakes. The drought had exposed every weakness. Wells ran dry, grazing land turned brown, and Ethan had been forced to sell off a quarter of his herd at terrible prices just to keep the rest alive. Then the wolves had come, drawn by desperation and easy prey. 20 cattle lost in the spring, another dozen through the summer. Each loss was money he couldn't afford to spare. The bank had been patient at first. Samuel Morton, the banker, had known Thomas Rourke and respected him, but patience had limits, and Ethan was rapidly approaching them. The court order had arrived at the worst possible time, or perhaps the territory had timed it exactly right, knowing struggling ranchers would be easiest to dispossess. "You thinking about that widow's offer?" Ethan turned. Charlie Blackwood stood at the edge of the porch, his horse ground-tied nearby. Charlie was 63, had worked for Thomas Rourke since the beginning, and stayed on after his death despite Ethan's inability to pay regular wages. They'd worked out an arrangement. Charlie got room and board, a share of any profits, and the promise of back pay when things improved. "How'd you hear about that?" "Town's small, boss." Sarah Murphy heard the whole conversation from the hotel window. Charlie climbed the porch steps, moving with the careful stiffness of a man whose body remembered every hard fall and cold night of 6 decades of ranch work. "Been expecting someone to mention it. What do you think?" Charlie pulled out his pipe and tobacco, taking his time with the ritual of packing and lighting it. The old cowboy never rushed to judgment on anything. "I think," he said finally, smoke curling from the pipe, "that pride's expensive, and you can't afford it right now. It's not about pride, isn't it?" Charlie's eyes were kind but direct. "Your daddy married your mother when he was 48 and she was 22. Half the town thought she was too young for him, that she was just after his money, which was a joke since he barely had any. They were happy, though. Built this place together." Ethan had heard the stories. His mother had died when he was 12, but he remembered her laughter, the way she'd worked alongside his father without complaint, how she'd made the rough ranch house feel like home. That was different. "How? Because of age? Because they didn't start out in love?" Charlie shook his head. "Your mother told me once that she agreed to marry your father because he needed help with a young son, and she needed to escape her father's house. Love came later. Respect came first." The sun climbed higher, warming the September morning. In the distance, Ethan could see his small herd, barely 200 head now, when the land could support 3 times that. Everything his father built was slipping away, and Ethan's pride was the only thing stopping him from accepting help. "What if I fail anyway?" The question came out quieter than he intended. "What if I marry her and still lose the ranch? Then I've dragged her into my disaster." "What if you don't marry her and definitely lose it?" Charlie countered. "Mrs. Whitmore struck me as a woman who knows her own mind. If she's offering, she's considered the risks." Ethan finished his coffee, the bitter ground settling at the bottom of the cup. "Town's going to have a field day with this." "Town's already having a field day with you losing the ranch. Might as well give them something new to talk about." Charlie knocked out his pipe against the porch rail. "Besides, I met Mrs. Whitmore a few times. She doesn't strike me as a woman who cares much what people say about her." That was true. Eleanor Whitmore had maintained her dignity despite the whispers that followed her around Cedar Ridge. The town matrons had tried to take her under their wing, assign her a proper place in the social hierarchy, and she'd politely declined to be managed. She attended church when she pleased, made her own decisions about where to shop and who to speak with, and seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that half the town thought her behavior was inappropriate for a woman her age. "I need to check the fence lines," Ethan said, making a decision. "We've got wolves coming down from the high country again. I'll be back by evening." Charlie nodded, understanding this was how Ethan thought, on horseback, with work to occupy his hands while his mind worked through problems. The fence line ran for miles along the northern boundary of the ranch, separating Ethan's land from open range. He rode slowly, checking posts and wire, making mental notes of repairs needed. The work was meditative, repetitive enough that his thoughts could wander. His father had believed in hard work and persistence. "Land doesn't care about your problems," Thomas Rourke used to say. "It just needs someone willing to tend it properly." But his father had also been practical. He'd married Ethan's mother not for love but for necessity, and somehow that practical beginning had grown into something real. Could that happen with Eleanor Whitmore? Ethan tried to imagine it, her in his father's house, sitting at the table where his mother used to sit, managing the accounts and supplies. The image didn't feel wrong exactly, just strange. She was older than his mother had lived to be, older than seemed appropriate for a new bride. But she was also sharp, capable, and apparently willing to take a risk on a failing rancher. What did that say about her judgment? Or perhaps it said something about his own lack of options that he was even considering this. By afternoon, he'd reached the northeast corner where the creek ran strongest. This was the best part of the ranch, the reason his father had chosen this particular section of territory to claim. Even in drought years, the creek ran clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. Cattle could always find water here, and the grass grew thick in the bottomland. Ethan dismounted and let his horse drink while he splashed cold water on his face. The shock of it helped clear his head. 27 days left. Even if he rode to Santa Fe tomorrow, even if he found a woman willing to marry a stranger, he'd need time to court her, convince her, make arrangements. And any woman young enough to be considered appropriate would ask questions about his finances, his prospects, his ability to provide. Questions he couldn't answer honestly without admitting he was desperate. Eleanor hadn't asked those questions. She knew exactly what she was getting into. The sun had started its descent when Ethan remounted and turned his horse back toward the ranch house. He'd made his decision somewhere between the fence line and the creek, though he couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe Charlie was right. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. He rode into Cedar Ridge just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the buildings in shades of gold and shadow. The general store was still open, light spilling from its windows onto the dusty street. Ethan tied his horse outside and climbed the external stairs that led to the rooms above. He knocked on the door marked 3. Eleanor Whitmore opened it, unsurprised to see him. She'd changed from her earlier dress into something simpler, more practical, and her hair was pinned up in a loose arrangement that suggested she'd been reading or working. "Mr. Rourke." "I'd like to accept your offer," Ethan said, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. "If it still stands." She studied him for a moment, then stepped back from the doorway. "Come in. We should discuss terms." The room was small but neat. A bed, a desk, a chair, and shelves lined with more books than Ethan had ever seen in one place. Eleanor gestured to the chair while she sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining proper distance. "Terms?" Ethan asked. "We're entering into a business arrangement. We should be clear about expectations." She folded her hands in her lap. "First, regarding the ranch itself, you said you need a wife to keep the land grant. Once we're married, I want equal ownership." Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. The ranch was his father's legacy, his responsibility. But Eleanor was watching him with that direct gaze, and he forced himself to think past instinct. Why? "Because I won't put my future in someone else's hands entirely. I've been dependent before, Ethan. When my husband died, I discovered he'd made financial decisions without consulting me. Good decisions, as it turned out, but I had no say in them. I won't live like that again." She paused. "I'm offering my resources and my labor. I expect to be compensated with partnership." "What resources?" "I sold my farm for $1,800. I have most of that still, though room and board have made some dent in it. I'm willing to invest a portion in the ranch, but only if I have legal standing as an owner." $1,800. That was enough to clear most of his debts, repair the infrastructure that had been slowly falling apart, maybe even buy back some of the herd he'd sold. It was a fortune compared to what he currently had. "What portion?" he asked. $1,000 immediately, the rest held in reserve for emergencies. Eleanor's tone was businesslike. "In return, I want a 50% stake in the ranch." "That's..." Ethan stopped himself from saying, "too much." Was it too much? The ranch was worth more than $2,000 on paper, but paper value meant nothing if he lost it entirely. Half ownership for $1,000. Half ownership for $1,000, my labor and my capabilities. She leaned forward slightly. I can read and write and cipher, Ethan. I managed my husband's farm accounts for 15 years. I know how to negotiate with suppliers, how to spot when someone's trying to cheat you, how to stretch a dollar when necessary. Your father built this ranch, but you're struggling to maintain it. You need more than just money. You need expertise you don't currently have. The words stung because they were true. Ethan had been raised on the ranch, knew cattle and horses and land, but his father had always handled the business side. Since Thomas Rourke's death, Ethan had been learning through expensive mistakes. And if the ranch fails anyway, then we both lose. Eleanor's expression didn't change. I'm taking that risk knowingly. Are you willing to take the risk of accepting my help? Outside, the sounds of Cedar Ridge settling into evening filtered through the window. Horses moving in the livery stable, voices from Murphy's saloon, someone hammering a late repair. Normal sounds of a town that would be shocked by this arrangement. 50% ownership, Ethan said slowly. Full partnership in decisions about the ranch. Yes? What about other aspects of the marriage? Eleanor's expression softened slightly, the businesslike demeanor easing. I meant what I said before. I'm not expecting romance. I had that with my first husband, and I don't need to replicate it. But I am expecting respect and honesty. We'll be sharing a household, sharing a life in many ways. I'd like us to be friends, if possible. As for sleeping arrangements, she paused delicately. We can maintain separate rooms. I'm past the age of childbearing, so there's no pressure in that regard. The practicality of it should have felt cold, but instead Ethan found it oddly comforting. No pretense, no expectations beyond what they'd explicitly agreed to. When? He asked. As soon as we can arrange it. I assume you'll want to file the paperwork with the territorial court as quickly as possible. Eleanor stood and moved to her desk, pulling out a sheet of paper. I took the liberty of drafting a contract outlining our arrangement. You should have a lawyer review it before you sign. Ethan took the paper, scanning the neat handwriting. She'd outlined everything they'd discussed, the financial investment, the ownership stake, the terms of the partnership. It was more thorough than anything he could have written himself. I don't have money for a lawyer. Then read it carefully yourself. I'll wait. She returned to her seat on the bed, patient. He read through it twice, looking for traps or hidden clauses. He found none. The contract was straightforward, almost brutally honest in its assessment of what each party was bringing to the arrangement and what they expected in return. There's nothing here about what happens if one of us wants to end the marriage, he noted. No, Eleanor met his eyes. Because I'm going into this with the intention of seeing it through. I've buried one husband, Ethan. I don't take marriage lightly, even a practical one. If you're looking for an escape clause, we should discuss it now. I'm not. The words surprised him with their certainty. I just wanted to understand all the terms. Then do we have an agreement? Ethan looked down at the contract, then back at Eleanor Whitmore. She sat composed and dignified, a woman who'd survived loss and hardship and refused to be defeated by either. She was offering him a chance to save everything his father had built, asking only for equal partnership in return. His pride warred with his desperation for a final moment, then surrendered. We have an agreement. Eleanor's smile was small but genuine. Then I'll meet you at the courthouse tomorrow morning. We can file for the marriage license and handle the legal paperwork for the ranch ownership simultaneously. The sooner we make this official, the sooner we can get to work. News of the engagement spread through Cedar Ridge faster than wildfire. By the time Ethan returned to the ranch that night, Charlie already knew. Town's in an uproar, the old cowboy reported, a hint of amusement in his weathered face. Martha Henshaw apparently fainted when she heard. Reverend Collins is deeply concerned, and Samuel Morton asked if you'd lost your mind. What did you tell him? That my boss's business is his own. Charlie poured coffee from the pot on the stove. But between you and me, I think you made the right choice. Mrs. Whitmore's got backbone. Ranch needs that right now. The next morning, Ethan dressed in his best clothes, which weren't saying much, and rode into town early. Eleanor was waiting outside the courthouse, wearing a dark blue dress that somehow managed to look both practical and elegant. She carried a leather folder that presumably held the contract and other documents. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. The courthouse was a small adobe building that served multiple functions: territorial court, land office, and general administrative center. Judge Harrington worked out of a corner office, his domain marked by stacks of legal documents and the perpetual smell of pipe tobacco. He looked up when they entered, his expression shifting from businesslike to surprised to carefully neutral in the space of seconds. "Mr. Rourke, Mrs. Whitmore." He set down his pen. "I heard rumors, but I didn't quite believe them." "We're here to file for a marriage license," Eleanor said calmly, "and to register a change in land ownership for the Rourke Ranch." Judge Harrington's eyebrows rose. "Both at once?" "We're entering into a partnership," Ethan explained. "Marriage and joint ownership of the ranch." The judge looked between them, clearly trying to decide if this was legitimate or some kind of scheme to circumvent the household stability requirements. Finally, he pulled out the necessary forms. "I'll need to see proof of Mrs. Whitmore's widowhood status, Mr. Rourke's ownership documents for the ranch, and both of you will need to sign the marriage application." He paused. "You understand this is legally binding? Marriage isn't something to enter into lightly just to save a land grant." "We understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "We're both adults making an informed decision." The paperwork took hours. Judge Harrington examined every document with meticulous care, perhaps hoping to find a reason to deny the application. He found none. Eleanor's papers from Kansas were in order, Ethan's land grant was clear, and their intentions, unusual as they were, didn't violate any laws. "Reverend Collins will need to perform the ceremony," the judge said finally. "As the only ordained minister in Cedar Ridge, he's the legal authority for marriages." "We're aware," Eleanor replied. "We'll speak with him this afternoon." Judge Harrington signed the last form and stamped it with official seals. "The marriage license is valid for 30 days. Once you're married, bring me the signed certificate, and I'll file it along with the land ownership changes." He looked directly at Ethan. "This satisfies the household stability requirement, Mr. Rourke. As long as the marriage is legitimate and maintained, your land grant is secure." Outside the courthouse, Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. One step done. "The easy step," Eleanor said. "Now we have to convince Reverend Collins to marry us, and I suspect he'll have opinions about our arrangement." She was right. Reverend Thomas Collins received them in his study with the expression of a man about to perform an unpleasant duty. He was 50 years old, had been preaching in Cedar Ridge for a decade, and took his moral authority seriously. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Rourke," he gestured to chairs. "I've heard some disturbing rumors." "They're not rumors," Eleanor said. "We're engaged to be married and would like you to perform the ceremony as soon as possible." Reverend Collins's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm obligated to ask, are you entering into this marriage freely, without coercion?" "Yes," they answered together. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're aware that Mr. Rourke is significantly younger than you?" "I'm 55, Reverend. I'm perfectly aware of my age." Eleanor's tone remained polite but firm. "I'm also aware that age differences in marriage are common and unremarkable when the man is older. I see no reason why the reverse should be scandalous." "The circumstances raise questions about motivation." "The circumstances are private," Ethan interrupted. "But I can assure you this marriage is legitimate. We're both entering it with clear intentions and full understanding." Reverend Collins leaned back in his chair, studying them. "I won't perform a ceremony that I believe to be a mockery of the institution of marriage." "Then don't," Eleanor said quietly. "Examine your conscience, Reverend, and decide whether two adults choosing to marry for practical reasons is more offensive than letting a young man lose his inheritance because the law demands he have a wife. We're not asking you to approve or celebrate. We're asking you to perform your legal duty as the only ordained minister in this territory." The silence stretched out. Finally, Reverend Collins sighed. "Saturday morning, 10 o'clock. I'll perform a simple ceremony in the church." He pointed at them both. "But I'll be watching, and if I see any evidence that this marriage is a sham, I'll report it to the territorial authorities myself." "Understood," Ethan said. Outside the church, Eleanor brushed imaginary dust from her skirts. "Well, that was pleasant." Despite everything, Ethan found himself almost smiling. "You handled him well. I've dealt with judgmental ministers before. They're like stubborn mules. You have to be firmer than they are." She glanced at him. Saturday is 3 days away. That gives you time to prepare the ranch house for a new resident and gives me time to pack my belongings. We should also discuss immediate priorities for the ranch. They walked toward the general store, heads turning as they passed. Ethan could feel the weight of stares, hear the whispers that started as soon as they were past. Ignore them, Eleanor said, as if reading his thoughts. In a month, something else will scandalize the town and will be old news. You're sure about this? The question surprised him. We can still back out. Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Ethan, I've been sure about very few things in my life. I was sure when I married my first husband, and I was sure when I buried him. I'm sure about this. The question is, are you? He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the silver hair and the age that scandalized the town. He saw strength in the set of her shoulders, intelligence in her eyes, and a quiet determination that reminded him of his own father. I'm sure, he said. And he was. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning under skies that couldn't decide between sun and storm. Ethan stood at the altar in his father's old suit, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar from the trunk where it had been stored. Charlie Blackwood sat in the front pew, the only guest Ethan had invited. The rest of the church was filled with townspeople who'd come out of curiosity rather than celebration. Martha Henshaw in her usual black dress, Samuel Morton and his wife positioned prominently in the third row. The Murphy family clustered together near the back. Eleanor arrived exactly on time, walking down the aisle alone with her head held high. She wore a dress of deep gray silk that managed to be both modest and striking, her dark hair arranged in a simple style that let the silver threads catch the light filtering through the stained glass windows. She carried no bouquet, made no pretense that this was a romantic occasion. When she reached the altar, she met Ethan's eyes with a slight nod. Partners entering into an agreement. Reverend Collins performed the ceremony with mechanical precision, his disapproval evident in every clipped syllable. He rushed through the traditional words as if speed might somehow mitigate the impropriety of what was happening. When he reached the vows, his voice took on a sharp edge. Do you, Ethan Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Eleanor Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Her voice was steady, clear enough to carry to the back of the church. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Collins snapped his Bible shut. You may kiss the bride. Ethan hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part. Eleanor solved the problem by offering her hand instead. He took it, the gesture feeling more honest than a forced kiss would have been. The walk back down the aisle felt longer than the walk up. Ethan could feel every eye on them, could practically hear the thoughts racing through the congregation's minds. Martha Henshaw's fan fluttered rapidly, her face pinched with scandal. Samuel Morton's expression suggested he was already calculating how this would affect the ranch's credit situation. Outside, autumn wind tugged at Eleanor's skirts and sent leaves skittering across the churchyard. A few people offered stiff congratulations as they passed, but most simply stared. Charlie approached with a genuine smile and shook Ethan's hand firmly. Congratulations, boss. Mrs. Rourke. He tipped his hat to Eleanor. I've got the wagon ready to bring your things out to the ranch whenever you're prepared. This afternoon would be fine, Eleanor said. I don't have much, mostly books and personal items. It shouldn't take more than one trip. I'll be waiting at the general store then, ma'am. As Charlie departed, Samuel Morton made his way over, his wife trailing behind with obvious reluctance. Ethan, Mrs. Rourke. The banker's tone was carefully neutral. Quite a surprise, this marriage. Life is full of surprises, Mr. Morton, Eleanor replied before Ethan could speak. Indeed. Morton's eyes flickered between them. I hope you understand, Ethan, that this doesn't change the bank's position regarding your outstanding loans. Marriage doesn't erase debt. I'm aware of that. Are you? Morton's expression hardened slightly. Because from where I stand, this looks like a desperate move by a man who's in over his head. The bank has been patient, but patience has limits. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice pleasant, but with an edge that made Morton's wife step back slightly. Mr. Morton, I'm sure you're aware that as part of our marriage agreement, I've invested capital into the ranch. We'll be settling the outstanding accounts this week. I assume that will be satisfactory? Morton's eyebrows rose. Capital. How much capital? Enough to clear current debts and provide operating funds. Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'll be handling the ranch finances going forward. You'll find I keep meticulous records and expect the same from anyone I do business with. I trust that won't be a problem. The banker's face had gone slightly pale. No problem at all. I'll look forward to settling those accounts. As the Mortons hurried away, Ethan stared at his new wife. You just made an enemy. I made him respect us, Eleanor corrected. Men like Samuel Morton prey on weakness. He's been waiting for you to fail so he can acquire the ranch cheaply. Now he knows that won't happen without a fight. She adjusted her shawl against the wind. Shall we go? I'd like to see my new home in daylight. The ride to the ranch took an hour, Eleanor seated beside Ethan on the wagon bench while her packed belongings rattled in the back. She watched the landscape pass with an appraising eye, occasionally asking questions about boundaries, water sources, and grazing patterns. Her questions were informed, revealing knowledge that went beyond what most city-raised women would possess. My husband's farm was smaller, she explained when Ethan commented on this. 200 acres in Kansas. But the principles are the same. You work with the land's strengths and compensate for its weaknesses. When the ranch house came into view, Eleanor studied it silently. Ethan tried to see it through her eyes. The rough-hewn logs his father had cut from the mountain forests, the stone chimney built from creek rocks, the covered porch that wrapped around two sides. It was solid but simple, practical rather than pretty. It's smaller than I expected, she said finally. My father built it for function, not comfort. There are 2 bedrooms, a main room, and a kitchen. Charlie has a cabin out by the barn. Eleanor nodded. We'll work with what we have. Charlie arrived an hour later with Eleanor's belongings. Between the 3 of them, they carried everything inside. 2 trunks of clothes, 3 crates of books, a wooden box of personal items, and a standing mirror that Eleanor insisted on positioning in the smaller bedroom. This will be mine, she announced, surveying the room that had been Ethan's mother's sewing space. You'll keep the main bedroom? Yes. Good. That's settled then. She began unpacking with brisk efficiency, hanging dresses in the wardrobe, arranging books on the empty shelf. Charlie, where does Ethan keep the ranch accounts? In the desk in the main room, ma'am. Though I'll warn you, the organization leaves something to be desired. Eleanor's expression suggested she'd expected as much. I'll review them after supper. Ethan, do you have a current inventory of livestock? Rough count, we've got about 200 head of cattle, 20 horses, and some chickens. And how much land is actually suitable for grazing? About 1,500 acres. The rest is too rocky or steep, though there's timber on the upper sections. Eleanor pulled out a small notebook and began writing. What's your typical yield per acre? How many cattle can the land support sustainably? What's your current ratio of bulls to cows? The questions kept coming, each one revealing gaps in Ethan's knowledge or exposing problems he'd been avoiding. By the time Charlie excused himself to handle evening chores, Ethan felt like he'd been interrogated by a territorial marshal. I'm not trying to make you feel inadequate, Eleanor said, softening her tone as she closed the notebook. But I need to understand the complete picture if I'm going to help turn things around. You're right. Ethan sank into a chair. I've been so focused on day-to-day survival that I haven't been thinking strategically. My father was good at that. I'm not. Yet. Eleanor moved to the kitchen, examining the sparse supplies. You're not good at it yet. Strategy can be learned. She found flour, salt pork, and some dried beans. I'll make supper. You should show me the ranch records before it gets dark. The account books were worse than Ethan had admitted, even to himself. Eleanor spread them across the kitchen table while beans simmered on the stove, her expression growing grimmer with each page she turned. This is chaos, she said finally. You've got expenses recorded with no dates, income listed with no source notation, and your running balance is off by at least $100. How do you know what you actually owe? I keep it in my head mostly. That's not a system. That's a recipe for disaster. Eleanor found a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing proper bookkeeping. Every penny that comes in or goes out gets recorded with date, source, and purpose. No exceptions. That seems excessive. It's necessary. She looked up at him. Ethan, You're operating blind right now. You can't make good decisions about the future if you don't have accurate information about the present. This, she gestured at the scattered papers, is a big part of why you're failing. The word stung, but Ethan couldn't argue with it. He was failing, had been failing for months, maybe longer, too proud or too stubborn to admit it. So what do we do? First, we get the books in order. That'll take me a few days of solid work. Second, I need to visit every supplier you deal with and renegotiate terms. Third, we do a complete inventory of everything on this ranch, every cow, every tool, every fence post. We need to know exactly what we have before we can plan what to do with it. Eleanor stood and checked the beans, adding water and adjusting the heat. Fourth, we figure out what's actually profitable here and what's just draining resources. Your father started this ranch, but he's been gone 3 years. The territory is changing. We need to change with it. That night, after a simple supper eaten mostly in silence, Ethan lay in his father's bed and listened to Eleanor moving around in the next room. The house felt different with another person in it. Not unwelcome exactly, but strange. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, to making his own decisions without consultation, to failing privately. That was over now. The next morning, Eleanor was up before dawn. Ethan found her in the kitchen, already dressed, and with coffee brewing, the account book spread across the table in a new arrangement that actually made sense. "I've been working since 4, she said without preamble. "I think I've reconstructed your actual financial position. It's not good, but it's not quite as bad as I feared." She walked him through the numbers over breakfast. Debts to the bank, to the feed store, to the blacksmith, to half a dozen other creditors. The total made Ethan's stomach turn. "But," Eleanor continued, "with the $1,000 I'm investing, we can clear the most urgent debts and buy ourselves breathing room. The key is making sure we don't end up right back here in 6 months." "How do we do that?" "By being smarter about everything." She pulled out another sheet covered in her neat handwriting. "I've made a list of immediate priorities. First, I'm riding into town today to meet with every supplier and renegotiate payment terms. Most of them have been charging you premium prices because you're desperate. That ends now." "They won't negotiate with a woman." Eleanor's smile was sharp. "Then they won't get paid. I'm the one controlling the money now, Ethan. They'll negotiate or they'll accept whatever I decide to give them." She was as good as her word. When they rode into Cedar Ridge later that morning, Eleanor marched into the feed store with the confidence of a general entering a conquered city. Ethan followed, curious to see how this would play. Marcus Webb, the feed store owner, looked up from his ledger with poorly concealed surprise. "Mrs. Rourke, congratulations on your marriage. What can I do for you?" "You can explain why you've been charging my husband 20% above standard rates for feed and supplies." Eleanor placed a receipt on the counter. "This order from 3 months ago, $12 for 50 pounds of grain. I've checked with suppliers in Santa Fe. The going rate was $8. Webb's face reddened. "The extra covers transportation costs. Cedar Ridge is remote. Cedar Ridge is 50 miles from the railroad. Everyone here pays transportation costs. What you've been doing is price gouging because you assumed Ethan was too desperate or too ignorant to notice." Eleanor's voice remained pleasant, but her eyes were cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to adjust his outstanding account to reflect fair market prices. Then we're going to establish new terms. Standard rates plus 10% for transportation, payment within 60 days of delivery, itemized invoices for every order." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. Because the alternative is I pay you exactly what I think you deserve for past services, which is considerably less than you're owed, and take my future business to Santa Fe. Delivery costs would be higher, but at least I'd know I wasn't being cheated." Webb looked at Ethan, perhaps hoping for support. Ethan said nothing. "Fine," Webb muttered. "I'll adjust the account. But I'm running a business here, Mrs. Rourke. I can't afford to—" "Then run it honestly." Eleanor picked up the receipt. "I'll expect the revised accounting by the end of the week. Good day, Mr. Webb." They repeated similar conversations at the blacksmith shop, the general store, and the leather goods supplier. Each time, Eleanor walked in with documentation of overcharges and walked out with better terms. By afternoon, she'd saved the ranch nearly $300 and established a reputation as someone not to be trifled with. You enjoyed that, Ethan observed as they prepared to ride home. I did. Eleanor secured her parcels in the wagon. I spent 15 years watching my husband negotiate with men who assumed they could cheat him because he was a simple farmer. He was better at turning the other cheek than I ever was. Now, I don't have to be. Over the following week, Eleanor transformed the ranch's operations. She created a proper filing system for all documents, established regular bookkeeping hours each morning, and began a detailed inventory of every asset. She rode the property with Ethan and Charlie, asking questions about grazing patterns, water access, and maintenance needs. Your northern fence line is a disaster, she announced after one such inspection. Half the posts are rotted, and the wires so rusted it wouldn't hold a determined chicken. You're losing cattle through there. I know, I haven't had time or money to fix it. We'll make time. Charlie, how many posts do we need? The old cowboy scratched his jaw. Maybe 200 for the worst sections, and at least 1,000 feet of new wire. Eleanor consulted her notebook. That's approximately $60 in materials. We can afford that now. Let's make it a priority before winter. They started repairs the next week, all three of them working together under Eleanor's organizational direction. She'd mapped out the fence line, prioritized the worst sections, and created a supply schedule that ensured they never ran short of materials mid-project. Ethan found himself watching her in unguarded moments. The way she handled tools with casual competence, how she could calculate measurements in her head faster than he could write them down, the quiet authority she brought to every task. This wasn't a woman pretending to be useful. This was a partner who'd meant exactly what she said about equal contribution. You're staring, Charlie murmured during a water break. Just thinking. Uh-huh. The old cowboy's eyes crinkled with amusement. Thinking that maybe the town doesn't know what they're talking about with all their gossip? Before Ethan could answer, Eleanor called out from further down the fence line. We've got a problem here. Looks like someone's been cutting the wire deliberately. They hurried over. Eleanor pointed to a section where the wire had been cleanly severed in multiple places, the cuts too precise to be accidental damage. Rustlers, Charlie said grimly. They've been cutting through to move cattle onto your land, then driving them out through the same gap. Ethan examined the cuts, fury building in his chest. This is fresh, within the last few days. Which means they're still active. Eleanor's expression had gone cold. How many cattle have you lost this year to rustling? Hard to say. 20, maybe 30 head. I thought they were just wandering off through weak fence. They were being stolen. She turned to Charlie. How long has this been happening? Started about 6 months back, best I can tell. Lost a few here, a few there. Never enough at once to be obvious. Eleanor pulled out her notebook and began writing. 6 months. 20 to 30 head. At current market prices, that's between $400 and $600 in losses. She looked up at Ethan. Someone's been systematically robbing you, and you didn't even realize it. The implications hit Ethan like a physical blow. $600. That was nearly a third of what he'd lost to the drought, and wolves combined. If he'd caught this earlier, if he'd been paying attention instead of just struggling to survive day to day. Don't, Eleanor said, reading his expression. Self-recrimination doesn't help. Action does. We need to figure out who's behind this and stop them. Could be anyone, Charlie said. Lots of small operations around here that wouldn't mind expanding their herds quietly. Not anyone. Eleanor studied the fence line thoughtfully. Whoever's doing this knows the ranch well enough to know where they can cut through without being spotted. They know Ethan's patterns, know when he's checking different sections. That suggests someone local who's been watching. The three of them stood silent for a moment, the autumn wind whistling through the mountains. Then Ethan said quietly, The Barquet hands have been acting strange around me, avoiding conversation, looking guilty. The Barquet? Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Who owns that spread? Samuel Morton, the banker. Something clicked in Eleanor's expression. The banker who's been pressuring you about loans. The banker who seemed very interested in acquiring your ranch cheaply. The banker who looked distinctly unhappy when he learned I'd invested capital. You think Morton's behind the rustling? Charlie looked skeptical. That's a serious accusation. I think it's worth investigating. Eleanor began walking back toward the horses. We need to catch them in the act. Set a trap. Over the next few days, they laid their plans carefully. Eleanor reviewed the pattern of thefts, identifying a rhythm. Cattle disappeared every 2 weeks, always from the northern section of the ranch. The next theft was due in approximately 3 days. We'll stake out the fence line, Ethan said. Hide and wait for them to show up. Too obvious, Eleanor countered. If they're as careful as they've been, they'll spot anyone waiting for them. We need to make them think they're safe. She outlined her plan. They would repair all the fence except for one strategic section, making it obvious where the weak point was. Then Ethan would make a show of riding to town, letting it be known he'd be gone overnight on business. Charlie would handle normal ranch duties in full view, but Eleanor would be hiding in the rocks above the fence line with Ethan's rifle, watching. Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. If it is Morton's men, they could be dangerous. Which is why I'll be hidden with a rifle. I'm a good shot, Ethan. My husband taught me. Eleanor's expression brooked no argument. I'm smaller than either of you, easier to conceal, and unlike Charlie, I'm not needed for the visible ranch work. I'm the logical choice. She's right, boss, Charlie said reluctantly, much as I hate to admit it. Ethan wanted to refuse, wanted to protect her from danger, but Eleanor was already his partner, not his responsibility. She'd made that clear from the beginning. Fine, he said. But I'll be close by, hidden on the opposite side. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. We're gathering evidence, not starting a war. Eleanor checked the rifle's mechanism with practiced ease. Trust me. The night of the trap arrived with a new moon, darkness perfect for thieves. Ethan made his obvious departure late afternoon, riding toward town with saddlebags that suggested he'd be staying overnight. He circled back after dark, approaching from the east to reach his hiding position in a dry wash near the fence line. Eleanor was already in position in the rocks above, invisible even though Ethan knew where to look. Charlie was in the ranch house, lights burning late as if he was working on accounts. Hours passed. Ethan's legs cramped from crouching motionless, and cold seeped through his jacket. Above him, Eleanor must be freezing in the exposed rocks, but she'd insisted she could handle it. Near midnight, movement. 4 riders approached from the north, moving slowly and quietly. They reached the fence and dismounted, one of them producing wire cutters. Moonlight caught their faces for just a moment. Barquet hands, all of them. They cut the fence efficiently, clearly practiced at this. Then they rode onto Rourke land, heading for where the cattle typically bedded down near the creek. Ethan waited, counting slowly. They needed the rustlers actually moving cattle, evidence that couldn't be explained away. 20 minutes later, the riders returned, pushing 15 head of cattle toward the gap in the fence. Ethan tensed, ready to move, but Eleanor's voice rang out from above, clear and cold. That's far enough. Drop the wire cutters and step away from the cattle. The rustlers froze. One of them reached for his gun, but Eleanor fired a shot that kicked up dirt inches from his boots. I said drop it. I'm an excellent shot, gentlemen, and at this range I won't miss twice. Ethan emerged from his position, rifle ready. She's telling the truth. Now, which one of you wants to explain why you're stealing my cattle? The lead rustler, a weathered man named Jake Holloway who'd worked for Morton for years, spat in the dirt. We're just moving strays back where they belong. Through a fence you just cut, with wire cutters in your hand? Eleanor had climbed down from her position, keeping her rifle trained on the group. That's a creative definition of strays. Morton's going to... One of the younger hands started, but Holloway cut him off with a sharp gesture. Shut up. Morton's going to what? Eleanor's voice had gone very quiet. Fire you for getting caught? Deny he ordered this? Because here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to repair this fence right now. Then you're going to leave this ranch and never come back. And if one more cow goes missing, I'm going to the territorial marshal with evidence of systematic rustling and the name of everyone involved. You got no proof Morton's behind this, Holloway said. Don't I? Eleanor pulled a small notebook from her pocket. I've documented every theft over the past 6 months. Dates, locations, numbers. I've talked to other small ranchers in the area who've had similar problems. And I've done something you clearly didn't think a woman would do. I've been watching Morton's herd. Funny thing about cattle, gentlemen, they have brands. and I've spotted at least 20 head bearing the Rourke brand in Morton's holding pens, partially obscured by fresh Barquet brands applied on top. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at his wife, realizing she'd been investigating this for days without telling him. "That's enough for a rustling charge," Eleanor continued. "Enough to see all of you hanged. So here's my offer. You fix this fence, leave this ranch, and find honest work elsewhere. I'll give you 3 days to disappear. After that, I file charges whether you're still here or not." "And if we don't?" Holloway's hand was near his gun. Ethan stepped forward, his own rifle raised. "Then we shoot you for trespassing and call it self-defense. Your choice." The standoff lasted another tense minute. Then Holloway swore and dismounted. "Get the tools," he told his men. "Let's get this over with." They worked in sullen silence, repairing the fence under Ethan and Eleanor's watchful eyes. When they finished, Holloway mounted his horse and looked down at Eleanor. "You're going to regret this, Mrs. Rourke." "I doubt it." Eleanor's rifle never wavered. 3 days, gentlemen. I suggest you use them wisely." They rode off into the darkness. Ethan waited until the hoofbeats faded completely before lowering his rifle. "You investigated Morton without telling me." "I investigated a pattern." Morton was the logical suspect. Eleanor finally lowered her own weapon, and Ethan could see her hands were shaking slightly from cold and adrenaline. "I didn't want to accuse him without proof. You could have been hurt." "But I wasn't." She met his eyes. "Partnership means trust, Ethan. Trusting that I can handle myself, that I know my own capabilities. I wasn't reckless. I was thorough." He wanted to argue, to explain that his concern wasn't about her capabilities, but about losing someone who'd become important to him. But the words stuck in his throat, too revealing, too dangerous to say aloud. "We should tell the marshal anyway," he said instead. "Not yet. If Holloway and his men disappear, we've solved the problem without making an enemy of the most powerful man in Cedar Ridge." Eleanor started walking back toward the ranch house. "If they don't, or if Morton retaliates, then we go to the authorities with everything I've documented. But for now, we give them a chance to make the smart choice." Over the next 3 days, 2 of the Barquet hands departed Cedar Ridge, claiming family emergencies back east. Holloway and the 4th man stayed, but the rustling stopped completely. At the general store, Eleanor overheard that Morton was quietly spreading rumors about her being unstable, making wild accusations against respectable businessmen. "Let him talk," she said when she reported this to Ethan. "Words don't steal cattle." The fence repairs were completed, the books were in order, and Eleanor had renegotiated terms with every major supplier. 2 months into their marriage, the ranch's financial position had improved dramatically. They weren't prosperous yet, but they were stable, a word Ethan hadn't been able to use in over a year. One evening, as they reviewed the week's accounts together over coffee, Eleanor said quietly, "You've stopped flinching when townspeople stare at us." Ethan realized it was true. The whispers and judgment that had felt unbearable at first had faded into background noise. What mattered was the work, the ranch, the partnership they were building. "I suppose I have." "Good." Eleanor made a notation in the ledger. "Because I've been thinking about expansion. The timber on the upper sections, there's a market for it in Santa Fe. If we could work out transportation, we could generate additional income without impacting the cattle operation. That would require hiring more hands. 2 or 3, yes, and an initial investment in equipment, but the profit margin would be substantial." She showed him the calculations she'd worked out. "We could have the loans completely paid off within 2 years instead of 5. Ethan studied the numbers, impressed despite himself. "You've really thought this through." "I told you, I'm not interested in just surviving. I want to build something that lasts." Eleanor closed the ledger. "But it's your decision too. Equal partners means equal say." He looked at her across the table, this woman who'd married him out of practical necessity and proven herself invaluable within weeks. The age difference that had seemed so scandalous no longer registered. What he saw was competence, strength, and shared purpose. "I think we should do it," he said. "The timber operation, all of it." Eleanor smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look younger. "Then we'll start planning tomorrow." That night, Ethan lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch house settling. Through the thin wall, he could hear Eleanor moving around her room, probably reading by lamplight as she did most evenings. They'd been married 2 months and remained strangers in many ways. Their conversations focused on work and strategy rather than personal matters. But they were also partners in a way that felt more solid than many marriages built on romance. They trusted each other's judgment, divided labor according to capability rather than tradition, and were building something neither could have built alone. It wasn't what either of them had expected, but perhaps that was the point. November arrived with the first serious cold, frost painting the grassland silver each morning and ice forming along the creek edges. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching Ethan and Charlie load fence posts onto the wagon, their breath visible in the dawn air. The timber operation she'd proposed was moving forward, but slowly. They'd hired 2 additional hands, young men from town willing to work for modest wages, and purchased basic logging equipment. Eleanor had negotiated a contract with a lumber mill in Santa Fe, terms favorable enough that even one successful harvest would generate significant profit. But profit required work, and work required time neither Ethan nor the ranch could easily spare. The cattle still needed tending, winter preparations consumed entire days, and Eleanor had discovered additional problems with the ranch's infrastructure that demanded immediate attention. The barn roof leaked in 3 places. The well pump needed replacement parts, and half the winter feed supply had developed rot from improper storage. "You're frowning again," Charlie observed as he came in for coffee. "That's never a good sign." Eleanor turned from the window. "We're stretched too thin. The timber operation is sound in theory, but we don't have enough hands to run it properly while maintaining everything else. Could hire more men." "With what money? We've already committed most of the reserve capital to equipment and the initial timber harvest." She poured coffee for them both. "I've been reviewing the numbers all morning. Unless we get at least 2 good timber runs before spring, we'll be right back where we started, barely breaking even and vulnerable to any unexpected expense." Charlie sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Your husband ever tell you about ranching during the Kansas drought of '59? He lived through it, but he didn't talk about it much. Smart man. Some memories are best left buried." The old cowboy settled into a chair. "Point is, ranching's always a gamble. Weather, markets, disease, 100 things can go wrong. But the ones who survive aren't the ones with perfect plans. They're the ones who keep working even when the plan falls apart." Eleanor appreciated the sentiment, but Charlie's frontier wisdom didn't solve the fundamental problem. They needed the timber operation to succeed, which meant they needed Ethan focused on logging instead of scattered across too many tasks. But Ethan was struggling with that transition, unable to delegate effectively or trust that the ranch could function without his constant oversight. The man himself appeared in the doorway, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's coming, weather's changing fast." "How long do we have?" Eleanor asked. "Day, maybe 2. Charlie, we need to move the herd to the lower pastures before it hits. If they get caught in the high country during a blizzard, I know the drill, boss. Been doing this since before you were born." Charlie stood with a slight groan. "I'll get the boys started." After Charlie left, Ethan poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. He'd been working 16-hour days for weeks, trying to prepare the timber operation while keeping up with regular ranch work. Eleanor had tried to convince him to focus on one thing at a time, but Ethan carried his father's legacy like a physical weight, convinced that any failure was a betrayal of everything Thomas Rourke had built. "You need to rest," Eleanor said. "I'll rest when the herd's safe and the timber's ready to cut." "Ethan, you're running yourself into the ground. Let Charlie handle the herd movement. He's more than capable." "I can't just sit back and—" "You can, and you should. That's what having good help means." Eleanor set her cup down firmly. "You hired competent men. Trust them to do their jobs while you focus on the timber operation. That's where you're needed most right now." Ethan's jaw tightened, the stubborn pride she'd come to recognize settling over his features. "My father never delegated. He was hands-on with every aspect of the ranch." "Your father was building from nothing. You're trying to expand an established operation. It's not the same thing." Eleanor kept her voice gentle but firm. "And unless I'm mistaken, your father had your mother managing the household and finances while he focused on the land and livestock. He delegated to her." The comparison clearly struck home. Ethan stared into his coffee, wrestling with something Eleanor couldn't quite name. Finally, he said, "People in town are talking again, saying I've gotten soft, that I'm letting my wife run things while I hide up in the timber camps." There it was. The real issue wasn't trust in Charlie's competence or concern about the herd. It was wounded pride, masculine insecurity, in the face of Eleanor's very visible role in the ranch's recovery. Eleanor chose her words carefully. What people say and what's true are often very different things. You know that. Do I? Because from where I stand, they're not entirely wrong. You're the one who reorganized the finances, renegotiated with suppliers, caught the rustlers. You've done more to save this ranch in 3 months than I managed in 3 years. The admission seemed to cost him something. Maybe they're right to think I need managing. Stop! Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to make Ethan look up. You're confusing partnership with weakness. Yes, I've contributed skills you lacked, but you've provided the land, the livestock, the years of experience working this specific territory. Neither of us could succeed alone. That's the entire point of partnership. Partnership. Ethan laughed bitterly. That's a charitable word for it. Be honest, Eleanor. You married a man who was failing, invested your money to save his inheritance, and now you're doing most of the actual work while you work yourself half to death trying to prove something to people whose opinions don't matter. Eleanor crossed the kitchen to stand directly in front of him. Listen to me carefully. I married you because I saw potential, both in this ranch and in you. I invested my money because I believed we could build something worthwhile together. And I've taken on certain responsibilities because they match my skills, not because you're inadequate. Ethan met her eyes, something vulnerable and uncertain in his expression that made Eleanor's chest tighten unexpectedly. How do you do that? He asked quietly. Do what? Stay so certain, so sure that this will work, that we're making the right choices. He set down his cup. I question everything now. Every decision feels like it could be the one that destroys what my father built. Eleanor understood that fear intimately. She'd felt it after her first husband died, when every choice about the farm felt loaded with the potential for catastrophic failure. You know what my husband told me when I was paralyzed by indecision? She said. He said that doing nothing was also a choice, and usually the worst one. Action, even imperfect action, was better than paralysis. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man. He was, and he would have liked you. The admission surprised Eleanor with its truth. James Whitmore had valued hard work and integrity above all else, qualities Ethan possessed in abundance, even if he doubted himself. The moment stretched between them, something shifting in the careful distance they'd maintained. Then Charlie's voice called from outside, breaking the spell. Boss, storm's moving faster than we thought. We need to move now if we're going to beat it. Ethan grabbed his coat, hesitating at the door. Eleanor, go. We'll talk more tonight. She shooed him out. And Ethan, trust your people, including yourself. The storm arrived with brutal speed, temperatures plummeting as wind drove snow horizontally across the valley. Eleanor watched from the window as the last light faded, worry gnawing at her. Charlie and the hands had returned an hour ago. The herd successfully moved to sheltered pastures, but Ethan hadn't come back with them. He went to check the upper timber camp, Charlie explained, snow melting from his coat by the fire. Wanted to make sure the equipment was secured before the storm hit full force. Alone? In this weather? I told him not to. Told him it could wait until morning. Charlie's expression was grim. He said he'd be back before dark. But darkness had fallen, and the storm had intensified into a full blizzard. Visibility was near zero, the wind howling like a living thing. Eleanor paced the kitchen, checking the window every few minutes as if she could somehow conjure Ethan out of the white chaos. We should go look for him, she said finally. Can't. Charlie's voice held genuine regret. Storm's too bad. We'd just get lost ourselves, and then we'd have more people in danger instead of one. Best we can do is keep the lights burning and pray he finds his way back. Eleanor knew Charlie was right, but the logic did nothing to ease the cold dread settling in her stomach. Ethan was out there somewhere in killing weather, possibly injured, definitely in danger, and she was trapped here, helpless. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. Eleanor refused to sleep, maintaining her vigil by the window, while Charlie dozed fitfully in a chair. The storm showed no signs of weakening, snow piling in drifts that reached halfway up the porch posts. Around 2 a.m, a horrible thought occurred to Eleanor. What if Ethan had fallen, injured himself, and was lying somewhere in the snow, waiting for help that couldn't reach him? What if he was freezing to death while she stood warm and safe in the house they shared? She couldn't do it, couldn't simply wait while Ethan might be dying. Eleanor moved quietly, pulling on her warmest clothes. Wool pants she'd bought for riding, 3 layers on top, her heavy coat, scarf, gloves, and her husband's old fur hat. She took rope from the barn, a lantern, and Ethan's rifle. Charlie woke as she was preparing to leave. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" "Going to find him." "You'll die out there. The storm will kill you before you get 50 yards from the house." "Then it kills me. But I'm not sitting here waiting anymore." Eleanor's voice was steel. "I know the route to the upper timber camp. I've ridden it a dozen times. If I follow the fence line and creek bed, I can find my way even in the dark." "Eleanor, please, be reasonable." Reasonable got us nowhere. Ethan is out there, Charlie. He's been gone for 8 hours in weather that can kill a man in less than 2. I'm going. Charlie stood, his weathered face torn between practicality and something deeper. "You really care about him, don't you? This isn't just about the partnership." Eleanor paused, surprised by the question and her own answer. "Yes, I care about him. Now, are you going to help me or try to stop me?" "Help you." Charlie grabbed his own coat. "But we're both going. You'll need someone to anchor the rope." They prepared carefully, tying one end of a 100-foot rope to the porch railing and the other around Eleanor's waist. The plan was simple. She would search in expanding circles, always tethered to the house, while Charlie managed the rope and kept the lantern burning as a beacon. "If you don't find him in an hour, you come back," Charlie insisted. "No arguments. An hour, then we wait for daylight." "Agreed." The moment Eleanor stepped off the porch, the storm tried to kill her. Wind stole her breath. Snow blinded her. Cold knifed through her layers. She pushed forward, following the fence line by touch more than sight, the rope around her waist her only connection to safety. The timber camp was roughly a mile northeast, following the creek up into the foothills. In good weather, an easy ride. In this hell, it might as well have been on the moon. Eleanor called Ethan's name, knowing the wind would probably steal her voice before it carried 10 feet, but calling anyway. Nothing. Just the howl of the storm and the crunch of her boots through deepening snow. She reached the creek, following it upward. The rope played out behind her, Charlie's voice occasionally shouting updates about remaining length. 50 feet left. 40. 30. Then Eleanor saw something that didn't belong in the white chaos. A darker shape against the snow, too large and solid to be a rock or bush. She changed direction, the rope pulling tight. "More slack," she screamed back toward the house. The shape resolved into a horse, Ethan's horse, standing with its head down, snow covering its back. The animal was still alive, but clearly exhausted and half frozen. And nearby, partially buried in a drift, was Ethan himself. Eleanor fell to her knees beside him, terror flooding through her. He was unconscious, his skin frighteningly pale where she could see it, ice forming in his hair and beard. But he was breathing, shallow, irregular breaths that nevertheless meant life. "I found him!" Eleanor screamed toward the house, though she doubted Charlie could hear. She shook Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, wake up! We need to move!" No response. Eleanor made a quick assessment. No obvious broken bones, no bleeding, but clear signs of severe cold exposure. She needed to get him to the house immediately, but he was too heavy for her to carry and too unconscious to walk. The horse. Ethan's horse was still standing, still capable of movement. Eleanor grabbed the reins, speaking soothingly despite the chaos. "Easy, boy. I need your help. Come on." She managed to get Ethan's body draped over the saddle, securing him with the rope originally meant to guide her. Then she took the horse's reins and began the desperate journey back, following the safety line, hand over hand, pulling the horse along. The trip back took an eternity. Every step was a battle against wind that tried to knock her down, snow that filled her boots and found every gap in her clothing. She lost feeling in her fingers within minutes, her face went numb, and her legs screamed with effort. But she kept moving, kept pulling, driven by determination that refused to accept failure. Light appeared in the whiteness ahead, Charlie's lantern on the port. He met her at the fence, immediately taking the horse's reins and helping guide them the last few yards. Together they got Ethan off the horse and into the house, kicking the door shut against the storm. "He's alive, but barely," Eleanor said through chattering teeth. "Get him out of these wet clothes. I'll get the fire built up and prepare warm water." They worked together with practiced efficiency born of crisis. Charlie stripped Ethan's frozen clothing while Eleanor fed the fire until it roared, then heated water to warm but not hot. Too much heat too fast could be as dangerous as the cold. Ethan began to stir as they wrapped him in blankets and forced warm water between his lips. His eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Eleanor?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. You're safe. You're home." "Storm. Equipment. Had to—" "Forget the equipment. It doesn't matter." Eleanor held the cup to his lips again. "Drink. You need to warm up from the inside." "Fell. Horse threw me. Couldn't get up." Ethan's words came in fragments. "Knew I was going to die out there." "Well, you didn't." Eleanor's voice was sharper than she intended, fear transforming into anger now that the immediate danger had passed. "Because I came after you, and Charlie helped, and your horse was smart enough to stay close to you." Ethan's eyes found hers, something like wonder in his expression. "You came out in the storm. You could have died." "Yes, I could have. So could Charlie. So could you, you stubborn fool." Eleanor stood abruptly, needing distance from the emotions churning through her. "What were you thinking, going up to that camp alone in weather like this?" "I thought I had time before the storm hit." "You thought wrong. You almost died proving something to people who don't matter, remember? The equipment could have waited. The ranch could have survived losing some tools to storm damage. It can't survive losing you." The last sentence hung in the air, revealing more than Eleanor had intended. Charlie cleared his throat and stood. "I'll see to the horse and check on the boys in the bunkhouse. Make sure everyone else came through the storm all right." He grabbed his coat. "You two should talk. Been dancing around things for too long already." After Charlie left, silence filled the kitchen, except for the crackling fire and the wind battering the house. Ethan sat wrapped in blankets, color slowly returning to his face, while Eleanor stood with her back to him, staring at the flames. "I'm sorry," Ethan said finally. "For what? Scaring me half to death? Risking your life for no good reason? Making me realize that this partnership has become more than just a business arrangement?" Eleanor turned to face him. "Which thing are you apologizing for exactly?" Ethan met her eyes, and Eleanor saw her own confusion reflected there. They'd maintained such careful boundaries, such professional distance. But boundaries meant nothing when one person was willing to die searching for the other in a blizzard. "All of it," Ethan said quietly, "and for being too proud to admit that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a practical arrangement, at least for me." Eleanor's heart was pounding, and not from the exertion of her rescue mission. "When?" "When what? When did it change for you?" Ethan thought about it. "Maybe the night we caught the rustlers, watching you face down 4 armed men without flinching. Or maybe earlier, the first time I saw you reorganize the accounts and realized you were saving everything my father built. I don't know exactly when, just that it did." "I married a failing rancher to secure my own future," Eleanor said, needing honesty even if it hurt. "That was my intention. Clear-eyed practicality with no romantic delusions." "I know. But at some point it became about more than security. It became about building something together. About partnership that felt less like business and more like—" She struggled for the right word. "More like marriage," Ethan finished. "The real kind, not just the legal kind." "Yes." Eleanor moved closer to the fire, to him. "I don't know what to do with that. I told you I wasn't looking to replace my first husband. I'm not asking you to replace him. I'm asking—" Ethan paused. "Actually, I don't know what I'm asking. I just know that when I thought I was going to die out there, my biggest regret wasn't the ranch or the land or any of that. It was that I'd never told you that you matter, that you've become important to me in ways I didn't expect." Eleanor sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his blanket-wrapped form. You matter to me, too. More than is probably wise given that we've been married less than 4 months and barely know each other. We know the important things, though. I know you're brave and smart and stubborn as a mule when you think you're right. I know you snore a little when you're really tired, and that you read late into the night, and that you make the best coffee I've ever tasted. You know I snore? Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks. The walls are thin. Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I know a lot of things, like how you hum when you're working on accounts, and how you always check the door locks twice before bed, and how you look at the mountains in the evening like you're trying to memorize them. I didn't realize you were paying such close attention. I couldn't help it. Ethan reached out, taking her hand carefully. You're extraordinary, Eleanor. The town sees an older woman who married a younger man out of desperation. I see someone who saved my life twice, once with your practical proposal, and again tonight when you walked into a killing storm. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, hers weathered and aging, his roughened by ranch work but still young. The difference in their ages was undeniable. But so was the connection that had grown between them, built on mutual respect and shared struggle. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of this. Of letting it become real. Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes. I loved my first husband deeply. When he died, it nearly destroyed me. I told myself I'd never risk that kind of pain again. That's why I was comfortable with our arrangement. It was safe, practical, emotionally protected. But now it's not. No. Now I care whether you live or die. Now the thought of losing you makes me willing to risk my own life. And that terrifies me. She squeezed his hand. I'm 55 years old, Ethan. I don't have time for careful courtship or gradual falling in love. Everything at my age is accelerated, more urgent, and that makes it more frightening. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. I can't promise you won't experience loss again. Nobody can promise that, but I can promise I won't be reckless with my life anymore. Tonight taught me that I have more to live for than just the ranch. Such as? Such as partnership with someone who challenges me to be better. Such as building a future with someone I respect more than anyone I've ever known. He paused. Such as the possibility that maybe a marriage born from necessity can become something real and lasting. Eleanor felt tears threatening, a response she hadn't allowed herself since James's death. I don't know how to do this. How to be a wife, in more than name, after spending months keeping careful distance. Neither do I. So maybe we figure it out together, same as we figured out everything else. Ethan's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. No expectations, no timeline, just honest about what we're feeling and where this is going. That seems reasonable. Reasonable. Ethan laughed softly. That's very you, finding the reasonable path through emotional territory. Someone has to be practical. But Eleanor was smiling too, some of the fear easing. Though I'm not sure what the practical approach is to falling for one's own husband 4 months after a marriage of convenience. I'd say the practical approach is to accept it and see where it leads. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with surprising tenderness. Starting maybe with not maintaining separate bedrooms? Eleanor's breath caught. Ethan, I'm past childbearing. I can't give you children or... I don't care about that. I care about falling asleep knowing you're not alone in the next room. About having someone to talk to when I can't sleep, or to hold when the wind sounds like the world's ending. He met her eyes. Unless you're not ready for that yet. I won't push. Was she ready? Eleanor had maintained fierce independence for 18 months, refusing to need anyone. But tonight had stripped away her defenses, revealed the truth she'd been avoiding. She did need Ethan, not for security or social standing, but for something deeper and more essential. I think, she said slowly, that maintaining distance hasn't been protecting me. It's just been keeping me lonely. So that's a yes? That's a yes. Eleanor stood, still holding his hand. But you're sleeping in the main bedroom tonight where I can keep an eye on you. You nearly froze to death, and I'm not taking chances with residual effects. Yes, ma'am. Ethan let her help him to his feet, still wobbly from his ordeal. Though I should probably warn you, I talk in my sleep sometimes, and I apparently snore. We'll manage. They made their way to the main bedroom, the one that had been Thomas Rourke's and later Ethan's alone. Eleanor helped him settle into bed, piling on extra blankets despite the fire she'd built in the bedroom stove. Then she changed into her nightgown and, after a moment's hesitation, climbed in beside him. It felt strange and natural all at once. Eleanor hadn't shared a bed with anyone since James died, hadn't realized how much she'd missed the simple comfort of another person's presence. Ethan shifted closer, and she let herself lean against his warmth. "Thank you," he said into the darkness, "for coming after me, for not giving up. Thank you for being worth saving." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Though if you ever do something that stupid again, I'll kill you myself and save the weather the trouble." She felt rather than saw his smile. Understood. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Eleanor drifted towards sleep, thinking that perhaps second chances came in unexpected forms, not as recreation of what was lost, but as creation of something entirely new. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through windows still partially blocked by snowdrifts. Eleanor woke first, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar weight of another person beside her. Then memory returned. The storm, the desperate search, Ethan's near death, and their conversation afterward that had changed everything. She turned her head carefully, not wanting to wake him. Ethan slept deeply, the kind of exhausted sleep that followed severe physical trauma. His face in repose looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way he never allowed when conscious. Eleanor studied him, this man who'd become her husband through necessity and her partner through choice, wondering what exactly they were becoming now. The question scared her more than she wanted to admit. Love at her age felt both urgent and foolish. Urgent because time was precious and uncertain, foolish because she should know better than to risk her heart again. But watching Ethan sleep, remembering the terror of thinking he might die in the storm, Eleanor understood that the risk had already been taken. Whether she acknowledged it or not, her heart was no longer safely protected. She slipped from bed quietly, dressed in the pre-dawn chill, and made her way to the kitchen. Coffee first, then she'd assess the storm damage. Through the window, she could see drifts reaching halfway up the barn wall, snow still falling in lazy spirals though the violent wind had ceased. They'd be digging out for days. Charlie appeared from the bunkhouse as Eleanor was starting breakfast, stomping snow from his boots before entering. "How is he?" the old cowboy asked. "Sleeping, deeply, which is probably what he needs most." Eleanor cracked eggs into a pan. "How are the hands and the stock?" "Everyone's fine. Lost part of the barn roof on the east side, and we'll need to dig paths to everything, but no major damage." Charlie poured himself coffee. "Your rescue last night was the talk of the bunkhouse this morning. The boys are saying you walked straight into hell itself to bring the boss back." "I followed a rope to find someone who got lost. Hardly heroic." "You know better than that. Half the men in this territory wouldn't have tried what you did, and most who tried wouldn't have succeeded." Charlie studied her over his cup. "You love him." It wasn't a question. Eleanor considered denying it, maintaining the careful boundaries she'd protected for months. But what was the point now? "I'm beginning to think I do, which is terrifying." "Why terrifying? Seems like a natural thing, loving your husband." "Nothing about this marriage is natural, Charlie. I'm 27 years older than him. We married to save his ranch, not for love. People already talk about us like we're some kind of scandal." Eleanor flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. Now we're supposed to what? Pretend this became a real marriage? Act like the age difference doesn't matter? Does it matter? To you and him, I mean, not to the town gossips. Eleanor paused, truly considering the question. Did it matter? When she looked at Ethan, did she see a younger man she had no business caring for? Or did she see her partner, someone who challenged and respected her in equal measure? No, she admitted quietly. When we're working together, when we're talking, when I'm teaching him bookkeeping or he's explaining grazing patterns, the age gap disappears. I forget about it entirely. It's only when I think about what other people see that it becomes uncomfortable. Then stop thinking about what other people see. Charlie said it as if the solution were that simple. Your husband's father married a woman half his age, and nobody questioned whether that was appropriate. Why should it be different when the woman's older? Because it just is. Society has rules about these things. Society also had rules about unmarried men not being able to hold land grants, which is what started this whole thing. Sometimes rules are just excuses for people to judge what they don't understand. Charlie stood, draining his coffee. I'm going to start clearing paths. You might want to check on the boss before the smell of your cooking wakes him up and he comes out here before he's ready. Eleanor did find Ethan awake when she returned to the bedroom, sitting up in bed with blankets pooled around his waist. Color had returned to his face, though he moved stiffly, muscles punished by his ordeal. How do you feel? She asked. Like I got trampled by my own horse and then buried in snow for several hours. He attempted a smile. But alive, thanks to you. Thanks to luck and stubbornness. Eleanor set a cup of coffee on the bedside table. You should stay in bed today. Your body needs recovery time. I need to check the damage from the storm, make sure the stock. Charlie's handling it. The hands are clearing paths and assessing damage. Everything's under control. She sat on the edge of the bed. You need to rest, Ethan. Hypothermia isn't something you just shake off. I'm fine. You're not fine. You nearly died last night. Eleanor's voice sharpened despite her intention to stay calm. Please don't be stubborn about this. Not today. Ethan studied her face, and something in his expression softened. You're worried about me. Of course I'm worried. I spent half the night terrified you'd freeze to death, and the other half watching you sleep to make sure you kept breathing. Eleanor looked down at her hands. I know we said we'd take things slowly, figure out what we're becoming, but I need you to understand that almost losing you changed something for me, made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. Eleanor. Let me finish. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I've been protecting myself, keeping emotional distance because I was afraid of getting hurt again, but last night proved I'm already invested, already vulnerable, and I don't know what to do with that. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. You could try trusting it, trusting us. I'm trying, but it's hard when part of me keeps waiting for disaster, keeps thinking that happiness, this unexpected, can't possibly last. Nothing lasts forever, Eleanor. Ranches fail, storms kill cattle, good people die too young. Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. But that's not a reason to refuse what's good right now. My father taught me that. You work the land, tend the stock, build something solid, knowing full well that drought or disease or bad luck could destroy it all tomorrow. You do it anyway because the alternative is giving up before you start. Eleanor absorbed this, recognizing the wisdom in it even as fear tried to argue otherwise. I'm not good at just accepting things. I want plans, guarantees, clear expectations. I know, it's one of the things I love about you. Ethan said it casually, as if he hadn't just used a word that changed everything. Then he seemed to realize what he'd said, and his eyes widened slightly. I mean, you love me? Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't retreat from it. Yes. I don't know when it happened exactly, but yes. I love you. I love your strength and your sharp mind and the way you refuse to be anyone but exactly who you are. He paused. Is that terrifying for you to hear? Yes, but also, Eleanor searched for the right words. Also relieving in a strange way, because I think I love you too, and I was afraid I was the only one feeling it. They sat in silence for a moment, the confession hanging between them like something fragile and precious. Then Ethan pulled her closer, and Eleanor let herself be held, let herself stop protecting and analyzing and just feel. What do we do now? She asked against his shoulder. Now you bring me breakfast in bed, since I'm too injured to get up. She could hear the smile in his voice. And then we figure out the rest as we go, same as everything else. That's not much of a plan. It's the best I've got. Take it or leave it. Eleanor pulled back enough to see his face, saw the hope and affection there, and made her choice. I'll take it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and winter weather. The storm had damaged more than just the barn roof. Fences were down in 3 sections, 2 of the horses had developed respiratory problems from exposure, and snow made everything take twice as long as it should. But they worked through it together, Eleanor and Ethan finding a rhythm that accommodated both ranch work and their evolving relationship. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. They still maintained mostly separate morning routines, still had their designated tasks and responsibilities. But now Eleanor slept in Ethan's bed instead of her own, and they spent evenings talking long after practical matters were settled. Ethan told her about his childhood, about watching his father build the ranch and his mother make a home from nothing. Eleanor spoke about Kansas, about James and the farm they'd run together, about the loneliness after his death. "Do you ever feel guilty?" Ethan asked one night as they lay in the darkness. "About loving someone else after your husband?" Eleanor considered it honestly. "Sometimes. But James wouldn't have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone. He was practical about death, saw enough of it in the war to understand that life goes on for the living." She turned to face Ethan. "What we have doesn't diminish what I had with him. It's different. You're different." "Different how?" "James and I grew up together, married young, learned about life side by side. With you, I'm bringing all that experience to something new. It's not first love, it's second chance love. More complicated maybe, but also richer in some ways." Ethan absorbed this quietly. "I like being your second chance." "Good, because you're stuck with it now." December brought clear weather and the first real success of the timber operation. They'd managed 2 full harvests before the ground became too frozen for heavy hauling, and the lumber mill in Santa Fe paid promptly and generously. Eleanor reviewed the accounts with quiet satisfaction. They'd turned a profit significant enough to completely clear the bank debt and begin building proper reserves. "We should celebrate," Ethan said when she showed him the final numbers. "Celebrate how? We're snowed in on a mountain ranch in the middle of winter." "I'll think of something." That weekend, Ethan surprised her by transforming the main room into something approaching elegant, candles instead of lanterns, the good china his mother had saved for special occasions, and a meal he'd somehow convinced Charlie to help prepare. It wasn't sophisticated by city standards, but the effort and thought behind it made Eleanor's throat tight. "What's this for?" she asked. "For surviving our first year, for turning the ranch around, for taking a chance on a desperate rancher who didn't know what he was doing." Ethan pulled out her chair. "For being extraordinary when you could have just been practical." They ate slowly, talking about plans for spring planting and whether to expand the timber operation or focus on rebuilding the cattle herd. Business mixed with personal in the way that had become natural for them. No clear boundary between partners and spouses, between ranch management and marriage. After dinner, Ethan stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." "There's no music, so we'll make our own." He pulled her close, swaying gently to a rhythm only he could hear. "Besides, I never got to dance with you at our wedding. Seems like something we should remedy." Eleanor let herself relax into it, let herself enjoy the simple pleasure of being held by someone who loved her. They moved slowly around the room, firelight casting shadows that made everything feel dreamlike and unreal. "The town still talks about us," Ethan said quietly. "Let them talk. They'll find new scandals eventually. Morton especially. He's been spreading rumors that our marriage is a sham, that you're taking advantage of me somehow." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I had words with him last week when he suggested I'd been trapped by an opportunistic older woman." Eleanor stopped moving. "What did you say?" "That he didn't know what he was talking about. That you'd saved this ranch and probably my life multiple times. That I was lucky to have you as a partner and a wife, and that anyone who couldn't see that wasn't worth my time." Ethan smiled slightly. He didn't take it well. "Ethan, you can't go around antagonizing the banker. We still need to maintain business relationships." "I can, and I did. Our accounts are clear, Eleanor. We don't owe him anything, which means I don't have to tolerate his disrespect." Ethan resumed their slow dance. "Besides, defending my wife's honor seemed more important than politics." Something warm bloomed in Eleanor's chest at his words. She'd spent months trying to prove herself, to demonstrate competence and value. But Ethan defended her not because she'd proven anything, but simply because she was his and he loved her. The distinction mattered more than she'd expected. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Really seeing me, not just what I can do for the ranch or how I'm useful. For loving me despite, or maybe because of, all the complications. Ethan pulled her closer. There's no despite about it. I love you exactly as you are, Eleanor, age and all. They stayed like that, swaying in the firelight until the candles burned low and exhaustion finally drove them to bed. Eleanor fell asleep thinking that this, quiet domesticity mixed with deep partnership, was perhaps what real marriage looked like when stripped of society's expectations and romance novel fantasies. January brought its own challenges. A late freeze killed several newborn calves despite their best protective efforts, and one of the hired hands broke his arm in a logging accident. Eleanor found herself stretched thin again, managing medical care for the injured man while keeping the books current and planning spring operations. She was working late one night, hunched over the accounts by lamplight, when Ethan came in from checking the stock. "You're still up," he observed. "These supply orders won't reconcile themselves." Eleanor rubbed her eyes, fatigue making them burn. Ethan moved behind her, strong hands settling on her shoulders and beginning to knead the tight muscles there. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" "I sleep fine." "Eleanor." His hands stilled. "You've been working yourself into exhaustion. I've watched you get up at 4 in the morning and work until midnight for the past 2 weeks. The ranch needs you healthy and functional, not collapsed from overwork." Ethan turned her chair so she faced him. "We hired hands so we wouldn't have to do everything ourselves, remember? Time to practice what you preached." Eleanor wanted to argue, to explain that she was fine, that someone had to manage all these details. But the truth was she was exhausted, running on coffee and stubbornness. And Ethan was right. She'd been the one insisting he delegate and trust his people. Time to take her own advice. "Maybe I could train one of the hands to help with bookkeeping," she admitted. "The younger one, Tom, can read and cipher. He might be capable of handling supply orders and basic inventory." "Good. Start tomorrow." Ethan pulled her to her feet. "Tonight, you're sleeping. It's barely 9 o'clock. Then we'll sleep early. Or we can lie in bed and talk. Or do anything else that doesn't involve account books and supply manifests." He steered her toward the bedroom with gentle insistence. "Come on. The ranch survived before you came. It'll survive one night of you resting." In bed, Eleanor tried to turn off the mental catalog of tasks awaiting her, tried to simply be present. Ethan seemed to sense her struggle because he started talking, telling her about a colt being born in the spring, about plans to expand the stable, about small details that required no response from her. His voice washed over her like a lullaby, and she felt herself finally relaxing. "I'm not used to being taken care of," she murmured sleepily. "I know, but you're going to have to get used to it." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Partnership works both ways. You've been taking care of me and this ranch for months. Time I returned the favor." Eleanor wanted to say something profound, something that captured how much his care meant to her. But sleep was pulling her under, and the best she could manage was, "Thank you." "Always," Ethan whispered, and Eleanor drifted off thinking that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where she could be both strong and cared for, both capable and vulnerable. February arrived with the first hints of spring, longer days, ice melting from the creek edges, the smell of damp earth replacing winter's sterile cold. Eleanor stood on the porch one morning, watching mist rise from the valley, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, perhaps. Or simply acceptance that this was her life now, and it was good. "Penny for your thoughts," Charlie said, joining her with his morning coffee. "I was thinking about how much has changed in less than a year." "You mean since you married the boss and turned this place around?" Charlie smiled. "Yeah, I'd say things have changed. Not just the ranch. Me." Eleanor struggled to articulate it. "When I came to Cedar Ridge, I thought I was done with any kind of meaningful life. I'd lost James, sold the farm, figured I'd just exist quietly until I died. This marriage was supposed to be practical security, nothing more. But it became something more. Much more. And I'm still figuring out how I feel about that." Eleanor sipped her coffee. "I'm happy, Charlie. Genuinely happy for the first time since James died. That should feel wonderful, but instead it feels fragile, like something that could shatter if I don't protect it carefully enough." The old cowboy was quiet for a moment, contemplating the misty valley. You know what your problem is, Eleanor? You think too much. You analyze and plan and try to control things that can't be controlled. That's called being responsible. No, that's called being scared. Charlie's voice was gentle but firm. You're scared that if you fully commit to being happy, fate will punish you by taking it away. So you hold back, keep one foot out the door emotionally, just in case. Eleanor wanted to deny it, but Charlie had struck too close to truth. What if you're right? What if I do fully commit and then lose him? I barely survived losing James. I don't think I could survive it again. Then you'd survive anyway, because that's what you do. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Eleanor. Strong enough to walk into a blizzard to save someone. Strong enough to stand up to rustlers and corrupt bankers. Strong enough to marry a stranger and turn it into something real. Charlie turned to face her. But strength isn't about protecting yourself from ever getting hurt. It's about loving anyway, risking anyway, knowing full well that loss is possible. When did you become a philosopher? 63 years of living teaches a man some things. Charlie drained his coffee. Ethan loves you, you love him, and you've built something good together. Stop waiting for disaster and just enjoy it while you have it. Before Eleanor could respond, Ethan emerged from the barn, saw them on the porch, and waved. Something about the simple gesture, the ease of it, the assumption that she'd be there waiting, made Eleanor's decision crystallize. Charlie was right. She'd been protecting herself, keeping emotional reserves in case everything fell apart. But what kind of life was that? What kind of marriage could thrive when one partner was perpetually braced for catastrophe? That evening, after dinner was cleared and accounts were reviewed, Eleanor made herself say the words she'd been avoiding. I want to make this work. Really work. Not just survive or function. I want to stop protecting myself and actually be married to you. Ethan looked up from the saddle he was oiling. I thought that's what we've been doing. We've been transitioning, getting comfortable with each other. But I've been holding back, keeping part of myself separate in case everything goes wrong. Eleanor moved to sit beside him. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be all in, fully committed, whatever that looks like. What changed? Charlie lectured me about being scared, and he was right. I've been terrified of loving you completely because losing you would break me. She took a breath. But not loving you completely is breaking me too, just differently. So I'd rather risk the loss than keep living half committed. Ethan set aside the saddle and pulled her close. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we have decades together, not just a few years. You can't promise that. Nobody can. No, but I can promise I won't be reckless with my life anymore. I can promise I'll consider you in every decision I make. I can promise that however long we have, I'll make it count. Ethan kissed her forehead. Is that enough? Eleanor thought about it, about what was enough in a world where nothing was guaranteed. Then she realized the answer had been there all along, in the months they'd spent building something from nothing, in the quiet domesticity they'd created, in the partnership that had somehow become love. Yes, she said, that's enough. Outside, the first spring peepers began their nightly chorus, promising renewal and new beginnings. Eleanor listened to them sing and thought about how life had a way of surprising you, how a desperate marriage could become a real one, how loneliness could transform into belonging, how second chances came when you least expected them but most needed them. She'd married Ethan to secure her future, but somehow, in the process, she'd found something more valuable than security. She'd found home. Spring came to the ranch with an explosion of green that transformed the landscape almost overnight. Eleanor stood in the doorway watching wildflowers carpet the meadows in purple and yellow, thinking about how much could change in a single year. 12 months ago, she'd been a widow alone in Cedar Ridge with dwindling funds and no clear future. Now she was a wife again, a rancher, a woman who'd found purpose she'd thought was lost forever. You're up early, Ethan said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. The casual intimacy of the gesture still surprised Eleanor sometimes, though it pleased her more than she could articulate. Couldn't sleep, too much planning running through my head. She leaned back against him. Tom's doing well with the bookkeeping, but we need to start thinking about hiring at least 2 more permanent hands if we're going to expand operations the way we've discussed. We also need to decide about the upper pasture. Charlie thinks we could run another 50 head up there if we improve the water access. Ethan rested his chin on top of her head, though that's a significant investment in infrastructure. One that would pay off within 2 years based on my calculations. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. We have the capital now. The timber operation exceeded projections, and the cattle prices are climbing. This is the time to expand while we're strong. Listen to you talking about expansion and long-term planning. Ethan smiled. Remember when you first arrived and thought this marriage would be a quiet arrangement to save a failing ranch? I remember thinking a lot of foolish things. Eleanor reached up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. I'm glad I was wrong about most of them. They stood together in the doorway, watching dawn paint the mountains gold, comfortable in the silence that had replaced their initial awkwardness. This was what Eleanor had come to treasure most. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the quiet certainty of partnership, the knowledge that they faced each day as a team. Speaking of expansion, Ethan said after a moment, I had an interesting conversation with Bill Henderson yesterday. He's looking to sell his spread. Eleanor's mind immediately began calculating. The Henderson property bordered theirs to the west, nearly 800 acres of decent grazing land with good water access. Combined with the Rourke Ranch, it would create one of the larger operations in the territory. How much is he asking? $3,000, and before you start running numbers, yes, we could afford it. Barely. It would use most of our reserves, but the long-term value would be significant. It would also make us one of the biggest landholders in the region. Eleanor could see the strategic advantage immediately. That brings both opportunities and risks. More land means more responsibility, more hands needed, more capital tied up in operations. But also more security, more diversification. If one section fails, we have others to fall back on. Ethan's excitement was evident in his voice. My father always dreamed of expanding west, but he never had the resources. We do now. Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying, that this would be Ethan's chance to exceed his father's achievements, to build something even larger than Thomas Rourke had envisioned. She understood that drive intimately, had felt it herself when she'd helped James expand their Kansas farm from 40 acres to 200. We should look at the property together before making any decisions, she said. Review Henderson's books if he'll let us, understand exactly what we'd be taking on. Already arranged a meeting for tomorrow. Henderson knows we're serious buyers if the numbers work. Ethan kissed her forehead. Partners? Always. The Henderson meeting went better than expected. Bill Henderson was 72 and exhausted from decades of ranching alone after his wife died, and his children moved east. He wanted the land to go to someone who'd care for it properly, not just to the highest bidder. When Eleanor reviewed his accounts and found them meticulously maintained, she knew they'd found something valuable. Your wife knows her numbers, Henderson observed to Ethan as Eleanor calculated profit margins and expense ratios. You're lucky to have her. I know. Ethan's pride was evident. She saved this ranch more times than I can count. Henderson smiled, something knowing in his weathered face. Heard about your marriage. Town had plenty to say about it at first. Age difference and all that nonsense. Eleanor tensed, waiting for judgment, but Henderson surprised her. My Martha was 15 years older than me when we married. Caused a scandal back in '52. People said she was robbing the cradle, that I was after her inheritance. All manner of foolishness. He looked directly at Eleanor. But we had 37 good years together before she passed. Best decision I ever made, marrying that woman, no matter what anyone said. Thank you for sharing that, Eleanor said quietly, unexpectedly moved. Point is, people talk, but only the two of you know what you've really got. Don't let other folks' opinions poison something good. Henderson closed his account books. Now, about the property. I want $3,500, not $3,000. Land's worth more than that, and we all know it. The negotiation took 3 hours. Eleanor and Ethan working as a seamless unit, she handling numbers and terms, he evaluating land quality and water rights, both of them understanding when to push and when to compromise. They settled on $3,200 with Henderson maintaining grazing rights for his remaining livestock through the end of the year. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Rourke, Henderson said as they shook hands on the deal. I learned from necessity, Mr. Henderson. And thank you for the land and for the advice about marriage. Both are valuable. Walking back to their wagon, Ethan took Eleanor's hand. 3,200. That's almost everything we have in reserves. I know. It's a risk. Eleanor looked back at the Henderson spread, already envisioning how they'd integrate it with their existing operations. But it's a calculated risk. The land is good, the price is fair, and the strategic advantage is undeniable. We'd be foolish not to take it. Then we're taking it. Ethan helped her into the wagon. Partners in expansion, just like everything else. The next weeks blurred together in a frenzy of activity. The Henderson purchase required filing paperwork with the Territorial Land Office, arranging for fence line adjustments, and planning how to efficiently manage nearly 3,000 acres. Eleanor created new organizational systems, hired 3 additional hands, and restructured the ranch's operational framework to handle the increased scope. Through it all, she and Ethan worked together with a synchronicity that amazed even Charlie. They divided responsibilities according to strength, Ethan managing livestock and land improvements, Eleanor handling finances and strategic planning, but consulted on every major decision. The partnership they'd built through necessity had evolved into something powerful and effective. You two move like you're reading each other's minds, Charlie observed one evening as they finalized plans for the spring cattle drive. More like we've learned to trust each other's judgment, Eleanor replied. I know Ethan won't make reckless decisions about the stock, and he knows I won't overextend our finances. That's not what I meant. Charlie tamped tobacco into his pipe. I meant you work together like people who've been married 30 years, not less than one. Like you're 2 halves of the same whole. Ethan and Eleanor exchanged glances, something warm passing between them. Charlie was right. They had become 2 halves of a functional whole, each complementing the other's weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. Maybe that's what happens when you build a marriage on respect instead of romance, Eleanor said. You create something solid instead of something that burns bright and fast. Who says you can't have both? Charlie lit his pipe. Seems to me you two have the solid foundation and the romance. Best of both worlds. After Charlie left, Ethan pulled Eleanor into his arms. He's not wrong about the romance part. I do love you quite desperately, practical foundation or not. Desperately seems excessive, but Eleanor was smiling as she said it. Excessively, then. Unreasonably. However you want to phrase it. Ethan kissed her, slow and thorough. The point is, this marriage stopped being purely practical months ago. I noticed. Eleanor rested her forehead against his. And I love you too, desperately, excessively, all of it. They stood together in the evening light, the ranch spreading around them like a promise made real. This was what they'd built, not just a successful operation, but a life worth living. The cattle drive in late May brought the first real test of their expanded operations. Moving nearly 400 head to summer pasture required coordination, planning, and enough hands to prevent disaster. Eleanor stayed behind to manage the ranch while Ethan led the drive, a division of labor that made practical sense even as it twisted something anxious in her chest. You're worried, Charlie said the morning Ethan left. Of course I'm worried. Remember what happened the last time he rode out in bad weather thinking he had everything under control? Eleanor watched Ethan organizing the hands, checking supplies one last time. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it, same as we deal with everything else. Charlie's voice was gentle. You can't protect him from every risk, Eleanor. Ranching's dangerous by nature. All you can do is trust he'll be smart about it. Eleanor knew Charlie was right, but knowing and feeling were different things. When Ethan came to say goodbye, she pulled him aside. Promise me you'll be careful. No unnecessary risks. No trying to prove anything. I promise. Ethan kissed her thoroughly, unconcerned with the watching hands. I'll be back in 10 days. You'll barely have time to miss me. I'll miss you immediately, and you know it. Good. I'll miss you too. He mounted his horse, then looked down at her. Keep the ranch running, partner. I trust you completely. Watching him ride away with the herd in half their hands, Eleanor felt the familiar fear trying to take hold. But she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the work awaiting her. Trust went both ways. Ethan trusted her to manage things in his absence, and she had to trust him to handle the drive safely. The 10 days passed slowly despite constant activity. Eleanor reorganized the barn, worked with Tom on advanced bookkeeping, started preliminary negotiations for timber contracts, and generally kept herself too busy to worry excessively. But nights were harder, the bed feeling too empty, the house too quiet. On the 9th day, a rider came from town with news that made Eleanor's blood run cold. There'd been a stampede on the northern trail, cattle spooked by lightning, several ranchers injured. No specifics, just rumors and worry. Eleanor saddled her horse immediately, intent on riding north to find Ethan, but Charlie stopped her. "You can't go racing off without information. Could be a completely different outfit, not our herd at all. And if you go missing too, then who's managing things here?" "I can't just wait." "Yes, you can, because that's what being a partner means sometimes, trusting that the other person can handle trouble without you." Charlie gripped her shoulders firmly. "Ethan's smart and capable. If something happened, he'll handle it, and if he needs help, he knows how to send for it." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to ignore logic and follow her heart north to make sure Ethan was safe. But Charlie was right. Abandoning the ranch on rumor and fear wasn't partnership, it was panic. She forced herself to wait, to work, to trust. And late that evening, when riders appeared on the horizon, she felt something inside her unlock with relief when she recognized Ethan in the lead. He was limping slightly and had a bandage on his left forearm, but he was alive and whole and grinning as he dismounted. "We had some excitement," he said, pulling Eleanor into his arms despite her attempt to inspect his injuries. "Lightning spooked the herd on day 6. We managed to contain most of them, but I took a tumble in the process." "You're hurt." "Bruised ribs and a gash on my arm. Nothing serious." Ethan tilted her chin up to meet her eyes. "I'm fine, Eleanor. I promise." "I heard rumors about injuries, about disaster, and I didn't know if you were—" Eleanor's voice broke slightly despite her attempt at composure. "I'm here. Safe. And we only lost about 20 head in the stampede, which is far better than it could have been." He kissed her forehead. "Did you trust me to handle it?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I tried. Charlie had to talk me out of riding north to find you." "But you stayed. You managed things here instead of panicking." Ethan's voice held approval and affection. "That's trust, even when it's hard." It was very hard. Eleanor finally stepped back enough to properly examine his injuries. "Let me clean that arm properly and check those ribs. You're going to tell me everything that happened, and then you're going to rest." "Yes, ma'am." But Ethan was smiling, clearly pleased to be home, and fussed over. That night, after his injuries were tended and he'd told the full story of the stampede and recovery, they lay together in the darkness. "I thought about you constantly during the drive," Ethan said quietly. "Kept imagining conversations we'd have, wondering what you were doing, wishing you were there to talk through decisions." "I did the same. The bed was too empty without you." "We've become thoroughly married, haven't we?" There was wonder in his voice. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement and became a real marriage. Eleanor thought about it, about how naturally they'd integrated their lives, how completely she'd come to depend on his presence, how the thought of losing him could paralyze her with fear. "Yes, thoroughly married, which terrifies me sometimes." "Why?" "Because I love you so much that losing you would destroy me. And that feels dangerous, that level of vulnerability." Ethan pulled her closer. "You know what I realized during the stampede when things were chaotic and dangerous? I wasn't thinking about the ranch or the cattle or any of that. I was thinking that I had to survive because I'd promised you I'd come home. You'd become my reason for being careful, for making smart choices." He paused. "So maybe that vulnerability isn't weakness. Maybe it's what keeps us alive and fighting, having someone we love enough to come home to." Eleanor absorbed this, recognizing the truth in it. Her love for Ethan didn't make her weak. It made her stronger, more determined, more willing to fight for their future together. "When did you become so wise?" she asked. "Around the time I married a woman who teaches me something new every day." Ethan kissed her temple. "Go to sleep, Eleanor. We're both safe, both home, and tomorrow we can start worrying about ranch business again." Summer unfolded in a pattern of work and growth. The expanded ranch required constant attention, but the rewards were tangible. Their cattle herd increased, The timber operation brought steady income, and Eleanor's strategic planning positioned them to weather market fluctuations that devastated less prepared ranchers. The town's attitude toward them had shifted too. What had started as scandal had evolved into grudging respect as the Rourke Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the territory. Even Samuel Morton had been forced to acknowledge their prosperity when Ethan deposited significant sums in the bank each month. "People are calling you the territory's shrewdest rancher," Charlie reported after a trip to town, saying Ethan Rourke had the good sense to marry a woman with brains instead of just a pretty face. Eleanor laughed. "That's a backhanded compliment if I ever heard one." "Maybe, but it's better than what they were saying a year ago," Charlie grinned. "Also, Martha Henshaw apparently told the church ladies that she'd been wrong about your marriage, that clearly you and Ethan had built something admirable." Martha Henshaw admitted she was wrong about something? Mark this day in the calendar. But the approval felt good nonetheless. Eleanor hadn't realized how much the town's censure had weighed on her until it lifted. Walking down Main Street with Ethan now, she noticed respectful nods instead of judgmental whispers, genuine smiles instead of pitying looks. "We've become respectable," Ethan observed after one such trip. "How disappointing. You'd prefer to be scandalous?" "I'd prefer people to mind their own business either way." He helped her into the wagon. "But I suppose it's nice not to be the subject of constant gossip." "Speaking of gossip, did you notice how many people asked when we're planning to expand the house?" Eleanor settled into her seat. "Apparently the entire town is waiting for us to announce we're building something grander." "Are we?" Eleanor considered it. The ranch house was small, practical rather than comfortable, showing its age in a dozen small ways. "We could afford it now. A larger main room, perhaps a proper office space, definitely a bigger kitchen, maybe a covered porch that wraps all the way around." "My mother always wanted a porch like that." Ethan's voice held memory and fondness. "She used to sit on the small porch we have and imagine how nice it would be to watch the sunset from the west side, the sunrise from the east." "Then let's build it for her. And for us." Eleanor took his hand. "We can afford to create a real home now, not just a functional shelter. Something we choose together instead of just inheriting." They spent the next month working with a builder from Santa Fe, designing additions that honored the original structure while expanding it significantly. Eleanor planned the office and kitchen with the same meticulous attention she brought to ranch accounts, while Ethan focused on structural integrity and long-term durability. "You're building a legacy," Charlie observed, watching the construction progress. "Something that'll outlast both of you." "That's the idea." Eleanor reviewed the builder's latest progress report. "This ranch is worth preserving, worth investing in for the long term." "You planning to be here for the long term then? Not harboring any secret plans to return to civilized society?" Eleanor looked at the mountains, the valley spreading green and gold below them, the ranch buildings solid and prosperous. "This is civilized society, Charlie. Just a different version than what most people recognize. And yes, I'm planning to be here for the long term. This is home." The house expansion was completed in September, just before the first autumn storms. Eleanor stood in the new office, windows facing east to catch morning light, built-in shelves for her growing collection of agricultural and business texts, a large desk with room for spreading account books and planning documents, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "What do you think?" Ethan asked from the doorway. "I think it's perfect. Better than I imagined." She turned to face him. "Thank you for this. For building something that acknowledges my contributions instead of just tolerating them." "Eleanor, you're not tolerated here. You're essential. This ranch succeeds because of your mind, your planning, your refusal to accept mediocrity." Ethan crossed to her, taking both her hands. "If anything, I'm the one being tolerated. The rancher who needed saving by a woman smart enough to see potential where everyone else saw failure." "That's not how I see it. I know, you see partnership, but I want you to understand that you could run this entire operation without me if necessary. I'm useful, but you're irreplaceable." The compliment was offered simply, without false modesty or masculine pride. Ethan had grown beyond the insecure young man who'd needed to prove himself, matured into someone confident enough to acknowledge his partner's strengths without feeling diminished. "We're better together than either of us would be alone," Eleanor said. That's what makes it partnership. That evening, they hosted their first dinner in the expanded house. Charlie, the ranch hands, and Bill Henderson, who'd become a friend as well as a neighbor. The gathering felt like a celebration of everything they'd built, not just the physical structure, but the community and connection. To the Rourkes, Henderson raised his glass, who took a failing ranch and a forced marriage and turned both into something remarkable. Here, here! The chorus of agreement filled the room. Later, after everyone had left and Eleanor stood washing dishes with Ethan drying, she felt a contentment so complete it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, reading her expression. "That I'm happy. Deeply, completely happy. And that scares me because happiness this profound feels fragile." "It's not fragile. We built it on solid ground, trust, respect, shared work, honest affection." Ethan set down his towel and turned her to face him. "You keep waiting for disaster, Eleanor, for some terrible thing to prove that happiness can't last. But what if it does? What if we get decades together, building this ranch and this life, growing old side by side? I'd be 69 when you turn 50, 76 when you're my current age. The numbers still sometimes felt impossible. So, we'll be old together. I'll have gray in my hair, you'll have more silver in yours. We'll sit on that porch you designed and watch our cattle graze our expanded lands, and we'll remember that we built something that outlasted everyone's doubts." Eleanor let herself imagine it, years stretching ahead, seasons cycling through, the ranch prospering under their joint management. No guarantee they'd get that future, but no reason to assume they wouldn't either. "All right," she said finally. "I'll try to stop waiting for disaster." "Good." Ethan kissed her, slow and sweet. "Because I plan on loving you for a very long time, Eleanor Rourke. Better get used to being happy." Winter came again, marking a full year since Ethan's near death in the blizzard. Eleanor stood at the window watching snow fall, remembering her terror that night, her desperate determination to find him. So much had changed since then, so much had deepened and solidified. "Remembering?" Ethan asked, joining her at the window. "Remembering and marveling. A year ago, I was still guarding my heart, still convinced this was just a practical arrangement. And now? Now I can't imagine life without you. Can't imagine making decisions alone or sleeping alone or facing challenges without you beside me." Eleanor leaned into him. "You've become essential, Ethan, not for the ranch or for security, but for me. That's how I feel about you. Essential." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "My father used to say that the best marriages were the ones where each person made the other better, where partnership elevated both people beyond what they could achieve alone." "We do that for each other." "We do." Ethan rested his chin on her shoulder. "So what do you say we stop calling this a marriage of convenience and just call it what it is?" "What is it?" "A marriage. Real and true, built on everything that matters. Love, respect, partnership, genuine affection." He turned her in his arms. "You're my wife, Eleanor. Not my business partner pretending to be a wife. Not a practical arrangement. You're the woman I love. The person I want beside me for every day I have left." Eleanor felt tears threatening, the good kind that came from happiness too large to contain. "And you're my husband. My second chance at love, my partner in every sense. The man who proved that new beginnings are possible even when you think you're too old for them." They stood together at the window, watching snow transform the landscape into something clean and new. Outside, the ranch settled into winter routine, stock fed and sheltered, supplies secured, everything prepared for the cold months ahead. Inside, Eleanor and Ethan had built something warmer than any fire, more enduring than any storm. The years that followed proved Ethan's prediction right. They did grow old together, building the ranch into one of the territory's most successful operations. Eleanor's strategic mind and Ethan's practical knowledge combined to create something neither could have achieved alone. They weathered droughts and market crashes, celebrated profitable years and survived lean ones, always as partners. The town eventually forgot there had ever been scandal about their marriage. Young people grew up knowing the Rourkes as the couple who'd built an empire from almost nothing, who worked side by side with equal authority, who'd proved that unconventional marriages could succeed when based on mutual respect. Charlie grew older with them, eventually retiring from active ranch work but remaining part of the family. They hired more hands, some who stayed for seasons and some who stayed for years. The ranch house was expanded again, then again, growing with their success. And through it all, Eleanor and Ethan maintained what they'd built that first difficult year. Partnership that was also love, respect that was also affection, practical cooperation that was also profound connection. On their 10th anniversary, Eleanor found Ethan on the porch at sunset, watching the valley they'd built together. "Reminiscing?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Thinking about how different my life could have been. If the territorial court hadn't forced the marriage requirement, if you hadn't been in Cedar Ridge, if I'd been too proud to accept your offer." Ethan took her hand. "Every possible version of my life without you looks bleak and empty." "Mine too." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "I thought I was done when James died. Thought the best parts of my life were behind me. But you gave me something I never expected. A second act that's been even richer than the first." "How do you figure?" "Because I'm bringing everything I learned before to something new. I'm older, wiser, more capable, and I'm building it with someone who sees that age as strength instead of limitation." Eleanor looked at him fondly. "You never made me feel like I was too old or too opinionated or too anything. You just saw someone who could help you save what mattered. I saw someone extraordinary who everyone else underestimated. Their loss, my gain." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. The ranch spread out below them, prosperous and solid, a testament to what they'd built together. Inside, the house waited. Their house now, shaped by both their choices and dreams. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked. "Only that I didn't realize sooner how remarkable you are. But no real regrets." Ethan pulled her close. "You?" Eleanor thought about it honestly, about the whispers and judgment, about the fears she'd faced, about all the moments when she'd doubted whether this unconventional marriage could work. Against all of that, she weighed what she'd gained: purpose, partnership, love that had surprised her with its depth and durability. "No regrets," she said finally. "Not a single one." The stars came out above them, familiar constellations marking the season's passage. Eleanor leaned against Ethan, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about how life had a way of surprising you. She'd come to Cedar Ridge expecting simply to survive, to find basic security in a world that had little place for aging widows. Instead, she'd found a marriage that began in desperation and became something real and lasting. She'd found work that challenged and fulfilled her, land that felt like home, partnership that was also profound love. She'd found proof that second chances existed, that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary destinations. That age was less important than courage and capability. Most of all, she'd found that love measured not in years but in loyalty, in shared battles fought and won, in the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked quietly. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that the town thought you were desperate when you married an older widow. But the truth is, you might be the smartest man in the territory." "Might be?" Ethan laughed. "I married you, didn't I? That proves it beyond doubt." "Modest as ever." "I learned from the best." He kissed her temple. "Come on, it's getting cold. Let's go inside our impossibly grand house and remember that we built all of this. The ranch, the success, the life we wanted." Eleanor stood, taking one last look at the valley spread below them. This was legacy, not just land and cattle and timber contracts, but a life built on partnership and respect, love that had surprised them both by becoming real. They walked inside together, closing the door against the night, and Eleanor understood with perfect clarity that she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for, even though she hadn't known she was searching. She'd found home, in a place and with a person she'd never expected. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.